Planting a food forest is only 5% of the work. The other 95% of the work is management. Learning how to prune, when to prune, how heavy, what species, all the technical details are in this video. It's a week-long training that we did here on the farm, and we filmed all of it. All the decisions we made, the reasoning behind them, from pruning the high eucalyptus to managing our support species, formative pruning on the edible trees, even field grafting. That's what this video is all about. But before we get started, I also have a free download for you guys. It's a full demonstration site playbook for if you're creating a food forest demonstration site, whether it's for a family system to just produce fruit year-round, or whether you're doing a commercial scale project, a community project, or even like an eco resort or some kind of retreat that needs a food forest. This is the playbook that you need. Outlines the full 12-month roadmap. It's free. Click the link below, get yours, and enjoy this video. So we're here in the almost 5-year-old system, making observations before we do the reset, but you can see the conditions here, right? Early spring now, the threat of frost is gone, and so we're getting ready for some pruning to do a reset, opening things up. And this is gonna be the biggest reset of the season. We're gonna do our apical pruning, we're gonna do our stratification pruning, our maintenance pruning, our coppicing of certain species, and really, it's gonna become a totally different space. You'll see the transformation, but we're gonna hammer everything really hard because it's the biggest reset of the season, right? Giving the whole growing season to kind of recover, a few interventions here and there. This is what we're working with at the moment. Emergent and high strata kind of dominant system. A lot of the eucalypts, some of them are gonna get totally removed, some just pruned up, some apically cut. And so we'll kind of make those decisions, but that's what we're doing now is we're making observations around what strata movements and transitions are being ready to be made. All in preparation for the field grafting. Comes at the end. You don't want to field graft and then drop a big branch right on your sensitive tree. Speaking of field grafting, here is a great example. We tried grafting this one here last season. Clearly didn't take, so the seedling shot up again. That's funny. Here's one that did take. You can see it was field grafted here last year, and this is, I'm actually going to remove that tape so it doesn't strangle it. It put on maybe over half a meter of growth in its first year. Some of them even tried flowering in their first year, which is phenomenal. And we've also got our seedlings here that we did not field graft, just to give ourselves the opportunity to have some genetic trialing, genetic diversity, because obviously you're not getting new genetics and expression when you field graft. You're getting known cultivars. This disturbance in winter, frost, isn't so damaging, because if I did this level of pruning, if I did a really heavy intervention just before winter, it's going to open everything up and expose it to frost. For these systems where we have a lot of subtropicals, and now it's different in a temperate system, frost being present, not an issue, because there's no subtropical trees that I'm trying to protect from frost. Here, I'm trying to mitigate the frost, create more of a microclimate, a heavier overstory. We're thinking about our different strata of trees, our target crop trees. I'm still going to have all these different support trees occupying the other strata over winter, right? Which is why we can see the eucalypts, some acacia, tree lucerne, they're occupying that space and protecting all the young little seedlings below. This right here, what we're going to be doing over the next week, is the most intense pruning, the heavy-handed cutting. Some of the different pruning frameworks or pruning strategies that we use. Do you know what apical pruning is, or apical meristems? So a meristem is like the growing point, like the growing tip of a plant, and the apical one, the more apical dominant, is the one that's the tallest, the one that's getting the most of that hormone, right? Because there's a hormone that's at the tips, the growing tips of these plants. And so this right here, avocado from seed, this tallest one right here, it's got the most vigor. This is the apical meristem. So if I cut that, depending on where I cut it, if I cut it right here, it'll create these 2 new shoots. If I cut it down here, these will eventually become new apical meristems. Now, apical pruning is one that creates one of the biggest growth pulses, like the growth impulse, because what happens is it very dramatically changes the hormone into this regrow mode. And that's different than, so for example, if we have 2 identical eucalyptus trees, for example, if we do apical pruning on this one, right, we cut the top out, and on this one, we just limb the branches, we limb it up. The one where we did the apical prune, that's gonna have a bigger growth impulse. It's gonna send new shoots more vigorously up. Eucalyptus and poplar, they're both going to behave very similarly in that way. And so apical pruning is where you're taking the main growing head out. Now, you would only really be doing that once on a tree. Once you do that, it's going to start turning into this, where it has the branches that are going to start becoming more apically dominant. Instead of just shooting outwards and dropping off, they will become the new leaders. You can see some of that happening here. All right, this was cut this time last year. And so what we're aiming to do is not to kill the tree. You're aiming to maintain its health and its integrity. The first time I tried this, I fucked up. I made really ugly cuts with a ground saw, like a pole saw from the ground. I thought, meh, that's at 5 meters. I'll stand here, I'll make my cuts with my nice pole saw. I spent a lot of money on it, I was excited to use it. I felt really proud of myself. It was the first time I did that. I was like, oh, I did a great job. And that year, the eucalypts never responded well. They had a really hard time recovering. And when I went up the next year and I took the ladder up, and I had a look, the cuts were horrendous. They were ugly. There were shards and it wasn't a clean cut because I was so far away and I was doing this. And so even if it's a support tree, even if it's a tree that it just grows well, it's fine. We don't have to be careful with how we prune it. A tree will regrow faster once it's able to heal. And if you're gonna leave a nasty, gnarly open wound at the top where its main apical meristem was, it's gonna take longer to heal, and so it's gonna take longer to begin recovering. And so we wanna leave really clean cuts, which is why now I take the ladder up there, and I'm really delicate. I have my handsaw. If it's of an appropriate size, anything like less than this, I'll use a handsaw. It can be very controlled, very delicate. Much bigger, chainsaw, that's great. What we're aiming to do here is to have healthy trees that can live a long time. And so what this eventually turns into is, and I've seen systems 10 years old and they look like this. I call them the eucalyptus guardians because they're standing like this. Because these branches will turn into really strong foundations where eventually you have maybe another third branch over there. You have a little nest at the appropriate height. Grab the ladder, you climb into it, you harness in, you can sit comfortably in your little nest. And what's gonna happen, essentially, we spoke about pollarding previously, where basically pollarding is cutting at shoulder height and it keeps resprouting. You keep cutting it, it resprouts, cut it, it resprouts. You're doing that same thing, but it's a high pollard on the eucalyptus. And you're doing that on each of these kind of guardian arms. And as we're making our apical cuts, these are where the fingers will regrow from, the organic material, and then you'll cut them all back. Turn into these knobs, these fists, and then they regrow. The idea is you can maintain this for a long period of time. I've seen eucalypts 12 years old, big stem, managed like that. And it's perfect because you're not having to constantly keep raising it higher and higher, and you keep generating a ton of organic material, root exudates, growth pulse from doing that work. And so that's apical pruning and high pollarding. Apical and high. Yeah, it's based on how much shit you're trying to fit underneath. And so the problem with these really complex systems here, for example, where there was no real plan, it was just kind of like collect whatever I could, throw it all on the ground and see what goes. The problem with that is I'm gonna have a bunch of really cool species that I wanna fit all in there, right? So I maybe have a low strata species, I'm gonna have a medium strata species, I'm gonna have a high strata species. You can see already on the drawing, it's getting quite crowded. You have to also make sure you're leaving appropriate space between each of the strata layers as well, so they can breathe and have airflow, so it's not a tangled mess. That's the second form of pruning that we're going to talk about, is stratification pruning. But first, we're still focusing on the apical cuts. The height of your apical cuts is determined by how much shit you're trying to stack underneath. The beauty of not having complex systems, you're not having to keep pushing and pushing your apical cuts up to 8 meters, which is possible. It's just a lot higher than 4.5 or 5 meters. The more systems I see, the more I'm inspired by the ones that are elegant, the ones that are straightforward, and you can delegate the work. It's gonna be really hard for me to delegate this system to anybody. And I'm trusting us here. There's not a pattern, there's not a repetition, and you have to be able to correctly identify what's the species, where is it going, where does it wanna sit, and how do I manage it in relation to what's right next to it? And how does that change if the thing that's next to it is this versus this? It's a lot of nuance. Whereas if you have a system that's just, for example, plums, and poplar, and then you have more plums over here. All you have to do is teach somebody, here's how you prune plums, here's how you prune the poplar at these different times, go for it. There's less decision making, and people who aren't super enthusiastic or nerdy and want to learn every single thing about this, they're just there to maybe have a paycheck and do the work. These systems are more, you can delegate more. And so I'm more and more inspired by that, which is part of the idea for the newer system, is it's becoming a little bit more in that direction, a little bit less crazy and complex, a bit more structure. And when your plums, for example, aren't going more than, say, 3 meters, all you'd need is an extra meter here. So take that to 4 meters, because you want at least like a meter, maybe 1.5 meters of gap between strata. You could do your apical cuts on the poplar at 4 meters. That's quite achievable. But as soon as you start saying, well, we also want to fit the low strata in, okay, maybe that works because you raise the plums up, you're not harvesting plums down here. But then say, oh, but we also want to add a high strata in here. Well, suddenly then you're going to have to push your eucalypt up another couple meters, or your poplar up another couple meters. With bananas, for example, they'll grow to different heights depending on how fertile it is, right? How good the conditions are. Right here in the area that's like in the middle of this section, not great conditions. And so the bananas aren't as tall as the ones that are getting the gray water over by the house. They're huge. They're like 5 meters. And so I would need to have a eucalypt above them. And so planning your management in according to what's planted below. And part of it is just making the observations, right? You can see what's here. A mulberry, an avocado, a papaya, banana. I can visually kind of roughly see where I want to send the eucalypt up and maybe start making those apical cuts. At a theory level, is that kind of making some sense so far in terms of determining the height of your system and how complex or simple it is? You can raise or lower that depending on how comfortable you are on ladders, pole saws, etc. What's the difference between the apical pruning and the high-pollard versus stratification pruning? Yep, teasing them apart because they'll grow together. Some branches will dive down, other branches will dive up, and suddenly you have this mixture of different canopy layers. Less airflow, less health for the trees, less photosynthesis. And so stratification pruning is taking the jungle that is overgrown and managing it into their defined strata. So this would be your high canopy, medium, low. And so let's say in this example that the low goes up to 0.5 meters, a meter gap up from that. Your medium canopy starts at 1.5. Maybe your citrus, for example, is a medium strata tree. Okay, citrus starts at 1.5, and then maybe it goes to 2.5 or call it 3 meters. So the medium's ending at 3 meters, which means our high canopy needs to begin at 4. So the avocado is the high canopy. It goes from 4 meters, maybe give it 2 meters of canopy space, 4 to 6, which means our eucalypt will be at 7 if you're adding a meter of gap. Is this making sense? Are we following? So you can see already, stacking 4 different strata layers, you're pushing the height of your system up. Teasing the layers apart is what the stratification pruning is. And when you're doing this, you're keeping this in mind, and so you say, cool, now it's time to start pruning the citrus. We always prune it 1.5 to 3. And so you're maintaining it there. Your citrus wants to grow to 3.5, you say, nope, maintain it at 3. It fits in the medium strata, 1.5 to 3. And every year you go back, keep it in its strata. And the avocado, branches droop down. Same thing happens here. Every year, the branches that droop down, I prune them. Those are also becoming less and less productive branches as they start to sag down. They lose the light, they lose function. And so it's part of maintaining a healthy tree is removing the old wood, allowing space for new wood, maintaining it in its strata from the bottom and from the top. And that's the beautiful thing, whether it's a low strata coffee or blueberries. One of the things you see as you want to do commercial scale is if coffee, for example, or blueberries are a commercial interest, you're not going to get the volume by only having coffee or blueberries in your tree line. And so that's why they move the low strata from the tree line and put it into the alley. You know, typically the structure is tree lines at 5 meters, and then you can fit 3 rows of coffee, blueberries, raspberries, whatever else in here. And that's going to get you your volume of production of generally the earlier succession stuff, versus trying to cram the coffee in there and get a high yield, and also managing the medium and the high layer in that same space. It becomes congested. And so teasing out the low strata, moving that into the middle so you can get the volume, and you're clearing up space for your tree lines. More breathing room, lower management. And depending on your succession, we have these emergent trees. Now emergent, sometimes people think emergent means, it's just the fast growing one that sits on top. But there are also emergent, slow-growing productive trees. For example, pecans, a lot of the nut trees. They're going to take a long time, but they're going to slowly grow, and eventually they'll want to sit in this place. And that's how we know when to take the eucalypt out. When whatever is coming next is saying, all right, give me that spot. Because maybe it takes, we've got a Paraná nut, the South Brazil Araucaria augustifolia. It's a tree, I'll show you guys. Mine is 4 years old, and it's about this tall. And so it grows very slowly. But I imagine that in 10 years, or maybe 8 years, it'll be right there, sitting right below the eucalypt, and I'll be looking at it saying, hey, you look like you want that space. The eucalypt has provided a ton of organic material, lots of exudates, lots of time in the system, it's contributed tons. Once the next thing in succession is begging for the space, that's when we know to cycle it through, whether it's the eucalyptus, whether it's a high strata thing. That's how you know, when do I cycle something out of the system? When do I know it's time for that thing to go? Is when something else is kind of like ready and begging for that space.
Does he go through the successions as he gets to the intermediate?
In what sense go through? Do you mean go through the different strata layers, or?
Yes, sorry. Strata layers,
Yeah, that's a great question. So for example, avocados want to germinate in like deep shade. And then once they're mature, they want to be in the high canopy position. And so yes, These things that eventually will be up here, they grow slow in the understory in their native environment, and they slowly make their way up through an existing, generally like a forest that's early in succession, and then they'll overtake and shade out the things that need full sun. And so without our management, this would still happen. This changing of place would still happen without us touching anything. We're accelerating it. And we're noticing, cool, it's time for to come up here, which it would do otherwise, and eventually it would just shade out this eucalypt, and the eucalypt would go, but we can accelerate that and do it neatly, faster, by cutting it down, placing the organic material, and it adds more ecological function.
So you would manage it as a low strata and then as a medium and a high.
No, because things don't change strata through their life cycle. It's more a matter of this tree is an emergent tree, but it starts off happy in the understory, but it doesn't change like, oh, now it's a medium, now it's a high. It germinates in these conditions, it has those conditions, and when it's at maturity, what strata does it want to sit in to be productive? For example, the American pawpaw, right, the Asimina triloba that we're going to plant in the new system, it wants to have its younger years in very deep shade. So that's why we're putting a bunch of stuff in to create that deep shade for it. But once it's mature, right, and they can live for, 70, 100 years, then it wants to be a high strata tree, to be really productive. And so it doesn't change from being a low strata to a medium and then a high. It just, once it's at productive stage, high strata, and we'll just guide it there. What's the other kind of pruning? Maintenance pruning. How is that different than management? Management is the general activity of these different pruning styles. Maintenance pruning, the way that I understand it and use that terminology, is specific pruning of fruit trees in particular to give them a happy foundation, right? To give them a strong, especially in the formative years, make good formative pruning decisions. And so we end up with a really nice shape for the tree. It's helping the structural integrity of the tree and making sure that you're not setting yourself up to have a really disease-prone tree down the line. So there's 6 kind of like main things that I'm looking for. First, I'm looking for branches that are rubbing and crossing, branches that are pointing inwards towards the center of the tree, branches that are pointing straight up, branches that are pointing straight down, and dead branches. And the crown, taking the crown out, which is basically the apical cutting, right? And that helps keep it in its strata. And so when I'm doing maintenance pruning, this is kind of focused on the fruit trees and just maintaining, cleaning them up, giving airspace, and each tree is slightly different, right? That's why as you scale, it's nice to refine in, because then you don't have to learn all the unique specifics of pruning all 12 of your different target crops, but you say, okay, cool, I can learn citrus and I can learn pears and plums and avocados and these and those, right? You have to learn disease cycles, pruning, harvest, all the details. And so another benefit of refining. These are kind of like the straightforward checklist that you can go through in your mind of, cool, as I'm approaching a fruit tree to prune, I want to take the main crown out, I want to give some sunlight into the tree, remove any crossing or rubbing branches, anything pointing into the tree, water suckers going straight up, things going straight down, and dead branches. So that's kind of general fruit tree maintenance. And the last one that was mentioned was coppicing, which is cutting at ground level, and you're basically creating a stool, a stump, that every year will continue to resprout. Willow, Mexican sunflower, elderberries, those are the main ones that I'm considering and using here in that manner. And so we'll do some of this.
Using willow as a crop for selling, is it basket weaving, or do you just use it as a mulch?
You're gonna love this. The 180 willows that we just brought over here are basket willows.
Yeah.
And so I'll be using them initially for organic material, but if there's an option for it and a market and desire, and I feel like I'm good on organic matter, then absolutely can sell them for basket weaving. And you could even do, for example, if that was an actual crop that you wanted to yield, here in that case, if it's working well, you could have in between your tree lines, instead of the blueberries or the coffee, you could literally just have coppice willows for that specific thing. Or you could do cut flowers, right? I've designed a system for cut flower, like Syntropic cut flowers, same deal. All right, so whatever value you have and you want to bring into your system commercially, think of how you might consider adding it into the alleys, right? The space between your tree lines.
Planting the willow, basket willow, how long do you think you'll be able to get stuff from that to make baskets?
In terms of the evolution of the system, that's a great question. I think it depends on how much light I leave in the system and how far off of the tree line. Like for example, if we plant the tree line and then we plant the willows super close, less time. Whereas if we plant the willows a little bit further out, more sunlight, more time, less chance of them having to lean out. And so we've got a few different formats of pruning, and then there's details for each specific tree. Eucalyptus, poplar, we didn't really talk much about the tree lucerne, but there's a lot of that here. There's also an order of operations. What would you guys approach first in terms of structuring the order of these? Which would you approach first? Why would we start at the top? Well, exactly, so that you have a buffer. We haven't just opened everything up underneath and then we're bringing down heavy eucalypt heads. Oops, crushed our nice thing that we just exposed. Or for example, if we have our citrus and we just pruned it beautifully, there's a really nice way I like to prune citrus. You pruned it perfectly and then a big branch comes and snaps this half off. If we hadn't pruned it first, we could then maybe have a few more options, more choices. Yeah, so we're just managing our risk. And so the first step is to take the highest strata, the emergent strata stuff first, let the stuff underneath buffer. Now, the funny thing about this, without fail, every single one of the courses and trainings that I go to, they say this. They say, yeah, start pruning with your emergent layer, and then you work down from there, and then what do we do when we get into the field? The instructors just start like chopping bananas down, and they're just like going, and I'm like, hold on, didn't we just talk about doing it a certain way, and then we're doing it a different way? And here's where it gets frustrating. Double handling. There's a way in which to organize material well, and there's a way in which to organize material poorly. Especially when you have bananas in the system, right? They create really nice banana logs that you can split with the machete, really nice, hydrating, and you can put that face down on the ground, and it keeps the moisture, it activates a lot of the biology. The best way to use the bananas, for example, would be to have that moisture sitting on top of other woody material to increase the moisture content in that woody material and accelerate its decomposition. Rather than having floating woody material that's in the open air, it oxidizes, right? The sun dries it out, air dries it out, and it's less ecologically valuable. It's not going to be interesting for fungi and earthworms. Whereas if you have the wood buried underneath the banana, it's moist, it's juicy, it's getting softer, fungus is more attracted to it, earthworms, you're creating inviting conditions. So that's how we want to think about managing the material. And it's the less sexy part of management. It's fun to like have a chainsaw and be up in the ladder pruning. The less sexy part is like actually like taking care of what you've just done and like organizing things well. For example, over here, this little 3-meter section. That's all prunings from this avocado when I did that pruning recently and I came through and I kind of lifted the lower branches. And underneath all of that is the big chunky woody material. I didn't place that on top of all the leafy branches because it would dry out. It would be less interesting or less inviting to the earthworms, to the biology, to the fungus. And so I bury the biggest material at the bottom. And if I had a wood splitter, I would do that. I would split the logs, open them, give them to the soil like that. Me, I don't, so we just drop the logs in the soil. And then on top of that, branches and leafy material. Why it matters is when we're starting off with our apical pruning, we're taking woody large material, and then we've got our woody large material right where we want it. Whereas whenever I go to these trainings and courses and they say, yeah, start at the top, and then we work backwards, but then we start cutting bananas first, well, it's like, cool, then we have all this juicy banana material, it has to go on the ground, and then we place all of our banana logs, and then it's more open, we're like, cool, what's next? We'll do the eucalypts now, because now we can see them. And that's the reason people say is like, oh, well, I couldn't see the eucalypts, I couldn't see what I needed to manage, and so it was easier to just cut the bananas down. Well, what's happened, now we have this big mess of all these banana logs, like all the banana logs and leaves on the ground, and then I have to go and prune the eucalypt, and then go back and retroactively like bury and like tuck things underneath, when I could have just done the order of operations correctly, cut the woody material, put it in place, and as I'm cutting the bananas, I can just drop it where it needs to go and I don't have to double handle material. Because 90% of agroforestry is materials handling, right? Whether you're on a tractor with a front loader moving mulch around, whether you're dragging branches, whether you're putting things through a chipper, whether you're taking material from the top of the tree and then macheteing it at the bottom and organizing things well, 90% of the work is materials handling. And so to reduce how much I'm having to handle those materials, the better. So this is the oldest line. This is the one that I planted very first after learning about syntropic agroforestry. This took me about a week to prepare the ground here because I only had the spade in my hands, and so it took a week to like prepare this 30-meter line. I initially didn't plant enough eucalypts. I planted like 4 because I was like, oh, you need eucalypts, I'll plant some. Those are the ones that I did the first apical cuts on. I damaged the top. They didn't recover well, they sucked, and so I just cut them all out. And so you'll see a few places where there's eucalypts that have either been cut at ground level or at any height. Thankfully, the following year, like the second year of the system, I replanted with more. And so this is the second generation of eucalypts that have gone into this line. Much healthier, much cleaner cuts. As we go through, just make those observations about the different strata layers, the different interactions, and if you don't know, like, oh, I don't know what strata that is, that's okay, just observe. Use your eyeballs and kind of see what's happening here, what are the dynamics, what are the things that are gonna eventually occupy what space in the canopy, and where might be that stratification pruning needing to occur. And so we'll just take maybe 5 minutes kind of walking. This here is actually a bed, so walk on the edge here, and you can actually see, if you come here, this is actually a wooden log footpath cut from that Banksia tree when I managed it 2 years ago, mostly because this is an area, you know, everybody walks through this path. And so to reduce compaction, especially where the roots will be of the trees anyways, if I can reduce compaction, build nice soil. What we have here is a lot of Okinawa spinach. There's these Japoticaba, which are in here as a low strata, long-term, slow-growing species. There's the Miyoga ginger, which is coming up. It's all through this line. It's a ginger that you don't have to dig up. The flowers are edible. They sit right at the base of the soil. There's a few other things. Just make some observations. What are you seeing? What could you identify? What's a mysterious one to you? And start thinking about what kind of management. This is the area that we're going to focus on, these kind of 3 lines. So take a walk, explore around. Don't be afraid to kind of like dig in and like have a look around and see what's going on. When people say, oh, citrus can't survive in that level of shade. Do you guys all see the healthy citrus over there? Really healthy, deep green leaves, beautiful. But the problem is this. People would see a snapshot of that and say, oh, but it can't survive in that level of deep shade forever. Like, of course not. But every year it needs a new shade. Do you understand what I mean when I say a new shade? It's a dynamic shade. It's not a stagnant, stuck. It's permanently under a heavy avocado because every year we're pruning the avocado. And so that's how these systems thrive, is it's a dynamic that's missing in a lot of conventional orcharding, which is why that wouldn't make sense of like, oh, but the trees need full sun. They can't survive in that level of shade. Of course not, but that's a snapshot that you're seeing, not the full picture. I've marked the eucalyptus that are being taken out entirely. I've gone through ahead of time and I've looked and seen which eucalypts need to be thinned out. It's something that I wasn't as aggressive with over the last number of years, and I'm seeing the benefit of being more aggressive with that because it allows for faster, better growth on the ones that do remain. And so I'm overplanting to allow myself for this, rather than underplanting and saying, oh, but I wish there was more options, or I wish there was more microclimates, or this one had a funny bend. Well, now I can just take the funny bend ones and say, well, there's one that's grown faster, happier, straighter, perfect. And also by doing this, by overplanting, you force yourself to manage, thereby forcing yourself to have more ecological function in the soil. You're dropping more organic material earlier and creating more decomposing root structures that are going to turn into nice compost and soil for the slower growing friends.
So, when you were picking this, like when you were looking through here, what made you pick this particular tree to cull?
Well, if we look here, there's 2 eucalypts a meter apart right here. Yep. This one's way healthier. It's got a nicer growth habit, and it's nicely spaced between that eucalypt, and it's beautifully oriented with the Araucaria, the mulberry, the fig. And this one, it's always going to be competing underneath the canopy of that eucalypt. It's never going to be super healthy. It's never going to thrive. Even if we remove this one, it's got all this weird, curvy, nasty shit. And so those are some of the decision-making factors. You can see more. I would encourage you actually to look for more of these marks, and then zoom back and say, cool, why would he make that decision? I've also done this so that we don't accidentally take trees out that I want to keep.
Yeah, right.
So here's an example of one that we took down last year.
So high?
You know, I think there's ecological value. For example, the pillbugs, that's an environment for them, whereas it's less of an environment for them if it's all on the ground. And so in trying to increase diversity, a snag is like a standing dead tree. There's a lot more life in a snag than there is on a tree that's on the ground. And so, yes, I want to use the organic material on the ground, but I also want to invite some extra diversity where it's possible and it's not in the way or impeded. And as time goes on, every time I do some management in here, I can like pull a little bit more off. Once I get to the stage where I can kick it down, I will. But I'm going to let this decompose up here. You guys notice how I cut this avocado tree right here? I cut the apical meristem, so it began to branch.
Nice.
Yeah, which means I can maintain something below this. Now, what it's going to be, maybe this, the cherimoya, but it'll occupy space below, and as I thin this up, more canopy space, but that'll allow me to climb into the tree rather than having to like monkey my way up a trunk. But that's going to be the first step, is removing the eucalypts that are going and then taking the ladder up to either do the apical pruning, or if they're still quite young and I want to let them go further, just limbing them up. And so we're making the face cut. I've just angled the first one up, and then I'll go flat here. The aim is to kind of go 30% into the tree. Now that wasn't a very clean one. It didn't go all the way back here. It's kind of like, it wasn't completed. Ideally, it's like an actual triangle chunk gone. You'll get your practice. We'll do it on this one. We'll do it on a few other ones. And then I would come and release it from the back, right? Because all the tension wants it to come this way. And I would just make sure that nobody else is over there. One thing that's important, some species are a lot more prone to ripping bark than others. And that's a really not a nice thing to see. All right, I hate seeing it. There was somebody here managing last season, and his nickname was the Ripper. Because every tree he would cut, you can see right there, it would pull bark down, it would strip the bark. And so the way you prevent that, you guys know the Joker in Batman? He got his smile and then like the cuts at the corner of his mouth. That's what you want to do here. Now, on this small little tree, a little bit silly as an example, but to demonstrate, you would basically, if that's the mouth, you'd make cuts here and there. Because what that's gonna do is it's gonna stop the bark from ripping and peeling all the way down. And so then you're looking up, you're seeing where's it gonna fall, nobody's over there, you'll cut. And once it starts to go, I can just stop and I'll just hold it here. And the banana caught it, and so it's not gonna finish snapping, and so we'll just cut it there. And then somebody might take that side and pull it through. What's the next step? Organize material. But it's important the way we organize this, because what I could do is I could be super chaotic. I could come with the machete and just start hacking away and make a mess. Then I'd have to pick that mess up and I'd have to organize it somewhere else. That's less fun. It comes organized already. It's in a structure. Biggest to smallest, out from there, it's organized. So let's do our best to keep it organized. You can either do that by hand, right? These branches actually peel very easily. The key here is I'm not letting go of all these other ones. I'm holding on to them. So then I have a little pocket I can put right there and feed whatever tree. Or I could double it up, make an even more dense little packet, make it even more inviting. Now, but what we should have done first is tackle the big stuff. All right, so as I'm doing this, I'm seeing what high value trees am I wanting to service the most, right? Does it make a whole lot of sense to service the short-lived papaya if there's like slower growing avocados or cherimoya or macadamia in here? I'd rather service the things that are gonna be here the longest, get the most out of it. And so first, we can grab the chainsaw and I would be actually cutting this up into foot-long sections. That way, you can do what we've been seeing here, is just organizing everything so it's really in contact. Because what's the problem if I just cut it here and I just throw this stick on the line? There's a lot of places that are up and elevated, floating in the air, whereas we want as much as possible in contact with the ground. That's the benefit of mulching and chipping things, is everything is like in contact. But we're not gonna go through that effort, and we wanna retain some long-term decomposition. So we're gonna cut it into sections that can really nicely just like slot in and cover the soil. And then they'll get buried in this material. And so when things are coming down, the first step is cut it, and then processing the larger material. And the next step would be this. Now, I showed you the example of using your hands. I don't usually do that, I usually use a machete. Give yourself a handle to hold. And the way you're gonna do this is if you can actually just, I'll pass this around, but you have your machete hand, your dominant hand, with the other hand, just like spin this around, like you're throwing it up, it's spinning. Just do that really fast for me. Great, next. Gotta pass the test. And while you're doing that, grab the chainsaw. The reason why we're not doing that first is we wanna put the heavier material down first. Keep the blade away from the soil at all times. Do not let it touch the soil. I will let you buy me a new chain if I see you do that. We can also use the Sawzall for this. So I'll just really quickly cut this up into a few sections, put it there. That was easy because it's straight and it was very clear, easy pieces to make. If we're working with a tree lucerne, that has more bendy branches. If we're working with maybe an acacia, it's less clear. How do you know where to cut? There's only two places. One is at a bend, or it's an elbow, right? Because if you keep an elbow, that's why I cut this one. Actually, I should have cut it at the elbow. But you cut an elbow because if it's laying there, anything that's past the elbow is gonna be elevated. And so you want as much of it to be in contact and flat as possible. The same practice with the tree lucerne. We're gonna cut those back. That'll be the next layer down, the high strata. So for now, it's the eucalyptus. Cutting it into small pieces that we can then say, cool, where do we want to place this? Where's a nice high value fruit tree? Well, there's a cherimoya there, right here. There's a lucuma right there. The question is, do I scrape away the old material and put this underneath and then cover it back up? Or do I just put this on top?
Put on top.
Put it on top, yeah. How nature does. Nature doesn't need to bury fresh organic matter. It's fine. It'll also assist with decomposing the old stuff faster. We'll put some for the macadamia, maybe put some for the cherimoya and the lucuma over here. Now we can manage this. Now we've earned the right. We've organized the biggest material first. We've earned the right to do this. Who's got a machete? Beautiful, thank you. So the reason why you clear a handle is so you can grab and turn. If it had branches up here, you're like, ooh, where do I hold it and cut, right? So just peel the back branches, give yourself a handle, and that's why I had you guys go through that exercise of just spinning this, because that's gonna be the motion. Here, very bad. Sorry, iron. Why would we not want to cut it here 4 centimeters out? It's gonna lift it up. We wanna have really clean, really we wanna be cutting at that join. And so the motion that I'm making is, I'm always cutting away from me. Don't be dumb, don't cut, perpendicular to the wood. Cut the direction that it grows, and this is applicable to everything. Banana leaves, Mexican sunflower, eucalypt. You always wanna cut A, away from you, but B, in the direction the tree's growing. Rather than, if I was trying to cut this branch, for example, it's gonna be a lot harder to cut through it that way than it will be to cut through it this way. All right, so always be cutting, holding the butt. And if I can aim where I'm cutting, right? Being careful not to cut my trees. You're spinning with your hand and you're exposing it. You're exposing it to make an easy cut, because positioning is so important with managing, whether you're up in a tree, positioning is really important, having good ergonomics, and down here. Again, don't want to see, like, the majority of machete injuries are from your hips down, right? Please do not chop yourselves. So we're chopping away from ourselves. There's no opportunity. Please hold on to the machetes firmly as well. I've seen somebody like throw the machete across the line. Don't do that. Keep everyone safe. And so I'm just placing stuff on top, and then I'm left with the main stem. How do I go about managing this? And so the way that I've found most useful is I'll actually push it into the ground. So I'm still cutting the direction that the tree grows, and at the bends, and then you just flip it over and you cut on the opposite side of that same, you don't even need to, but you cut it, you spin it, cut it, same spot, spin it. And then I would just tuck this underneath and make sure it's all sitting quite nicely. Take this here. Done. And it's nice and organized, parallel with the rows. Don't put material perpendicular to the rows, like through the line. Just concentrate on getting it right there. We're not even trying to put mulch like into the center. Because think about, where does this avocado feed from? Where is its feeder roots? Drip line. Drip line. And so even if I was trying to feed the avocado, I wouldn't dump mulch up against the avocado trunk. I would put mulch out. So over time, your rows expand. I think there's enough of the eucalypts that we can break into teams. If you see somebody doing something like, you notice like, oh, you could do this a little bit better, let them know. We're here to learn. Awesome. Have fun. Five and a half meters up, and we're creating the foundation of the nest that we'll be able to climb into. And these are going to be, that's why they're called guardian trees, because they stand above your food forest like this, and they provide tons of organic material. You could leave eucalypts up to 10 years like this, and you keep coming up here, they become stable branches. But the point is, you don't want it to be epicormic growth. I've just cut off all the epicormic growth that shot out from dormant nodes. You don't want to use that. You want to use the original branches, which is why the formative pruning, the first apical cut, is really important to get right. You leave 2, 3, 4 of the main structural branches, and those become your guardian shape, and they'll become the new apical meristems that we've just done the first clearing of. This was first cut apically last year at this time. Just came back, cleaned it up again, cleaned up all the epicormic shoots, and this is what it looks like. Before I start climbing them, I use this. This is great, it's like $200, but so this is how I'm managing the ukes until they're stable to be climbed. Extends up to 5 meters. I'll demo it with the Japanese raisin. You can see the lower limbs of this Japanese raisin tree, they die off, right? So it's a self-pruning tree in that sense. And so I'll just use this to demo, we'll pretend it's a eucalyptus, but the key here is you wanna make cuts that are really close to the collar, right? Same as with chopping the material. So you don't want to leave dead wood, because that's an invitation for unwanted interactions. I'll just take all these up, and this is exactly how I'm treating the eucalyptus until they're of an appropriate size to be putting the ladder on. And once they're at a stage ready to climb, you can either climb them to keep limbing them up, or you can climb with the ladder to do the apical cut. So this is an example of a uke where we did the apical cut last year, right? You can see where it was topped. Put the ladder in the same exact position, you climb up there and you do the wedge cut, you take the top down, and that became mulch that's since then disappeared.
Where you've cut that at the top, is it dead flat or is it a little bit of a slope?
It's got the face cut still, so part of it's flat, part of it's slanted. That's fine. If you want to clean it up again, do the whole thing slanted. If you want to be even having best practices, put the slant towards the sunrise, right? Because the hottest sun on that face is more likely to crack it open and be an invitation for water. And so if you're gonna leave a really clean cut on a fruit tree, for example, or on these, depending on how precise and tidy you want to be, once you do the apical cut, it falls off. Sometimes there'll be some splintering from the holding wood in the middle. You clean it up with a nice, clean, angled cut. Yeah, you're never gonna make a really tidy cut when there's a bunch of weight on it. So then you just take the top little bit, so leaving yourself some space. Sometimes it can get really challenging. For example, in Brazil, they're saying, I'm like on the ladder on the top, and I'm kind of tied in, but in Brazil, they don't use any of this stuff. They just like, they're up there and they're like, yeah, just hold on and do it. And they would push me. They would say, no, it has to be higher. You have to cut it up here. And I'm like, man, I don't feel safe doing this. But they want to push you to make the cut as high as you can manage, right? Because that allows the most space for things below. And so part of it is challenging because sometimes I was up here and I was doing the face cut up, and it's just that, and that's why positioning is so important. Having equipment that you can rely on and comfortably tie in, right? I'll do the example here. If you haven't used a harness like this before, this is called a pole belt, like pole belt. And what it does is it's super simple. It allows me to be comfortable on the tree. So this knot right here is called a prusik knot. It comes like this, you just buy the kit. It's like, for this section, it's like 150 New Zealand. And what happens is, this is not gonna go anywhere, but as soon as I apply pressure here, it slides through. And so it gives me more room, or if I take it on the pulley here, I retract it, I'm closer to the tree. And so when I'm up there on my tree, I'm pole belted in. You need to be able to open a carabiner with one hand, so you can pole belt in. Now this is not so stable, but mimics the eucalyptus. If I need to be closer, I pull here and I'm closer. And the reason that's useful is having good positioning is super important in the tree, whether you're with a chainsaw on a tree like this, wherever you are. If you have shitty ergonomics, it's gonna be hard, it's gonna be more exhausting, it's gonna be less safe, and you're gonna make a worse cut. And so prioritizing your positioning, make sure, just get comfy, leaning back. Chest height is a really great place, like between this section right here is the most ergonomic place to make a cut. The higher you go, the more challenging, the less you can see, and the worse off it's gonna be. If you, on the way up, said, oh, I'm gonna pass all these branches, I might as well just cut them on the way up, go up, cut, you might get to the point where you're ready to make the apical cut, but you're like, shit, I've just removed all my branches. And remember, you wanna keep some nice, strong branches below your cut. And so their recommendation is, don't clean up on the way up if you're doing the apical. Move through, if there's stuff like really in the way, okay, but go up, make your apical, and then clean on the way down so you can really refine and leave what you're meant to leave. That one was kind of messy, the regrowth, right? Do you notice all those little knots just below the tree? So that's epicormic growth. I'm gonna show you on the whiteboard. Growing, it's got these nice branches that it's giving us. On the way up, we clean the lower ones, and maybe we decide, cool, we'll take the apical cut right here. So you take it off. Your aim would then be to have those two be the guardian. Say we left three. Just what you don't want to do is delete those. You want to keep the main structural branches because, for example, if we cut it here, what's going to happen is it's going to send all these dormant nodes and it's going to make a big mess of sprouts, of branches. These are not structurally integral. Like, these are not very structurally sound. And so arborists, for example, hate climbing and cutting on epicormic growth. Basically means it came from below the surface. It came from dormant nodes rather than being one of those like main initial branches. And so you want to leave the initial branches, which is what those three were. All the little sprouts and suckers, epicormic, not structurally integral. So if I end up tying into one, if I let one develop and it turns into a big thing and I'm like, cool, I can tie into this, much more likely to break and snap. No good. And so that's why you want to leave 3, 4 main branches just below your apical cut. So we've identified those are the 3. I just went up there, I cleaned up all the epicormic stuff. Some of them might resprout, but that's okay. Most of the energy is going to be directed into those main 3. When it comes to climbing, we'll go over here and I'll show you the safe way of climbing. It's nice because it's not windy at all. There's no wind, so this is a great time to be pruning. It's also not like the very end of the day. I'm not exhausted, but as you get closer to the end of the day, cut it before anything bad happens. You're looking for a few things. 1, which way is the tree already leaning? Is it leaning this way? Is it leaning that way? Which way am I going to fell the top if I'm going to take the top out? The other thing with your ladder is the first thing you want to really pay attention to actually is like the footing. So before I'm like trying to place it on the tree, I'm just looking down and I'm like, cool, what's good positioning? Where is it stable? And then when I found a stable spot, I'm going to jump on, make sure that feels good before I pay much attention to up there. Then I'm going to make sure I'm not resting on any existing branches, right? Putting pressure on the branches that if I prune, they break. Just making sure it's nice, stable, and no wind. If there is wind, maybe come back at a different day, or just make sure that you're not leaning on the direction that it's blowing, and it's not worth the risk. Once you start climbing, there's actually a strategy that didn't seem intuitive to me at all, but now, after doing this for a few years, it feels very safe and comfortable. And it's instead of reaching around the ladder as you're climbing, which is like, let me hug the ladder and the tree, feel secure, you actually reach through the ladder on the way up. Now, why would you do that? If the ladder starts to slip, well, I've got my arms here to stop it from slipping. Whereas if I'm like this, I've got a lot worse holding on, right? So holding it here, it's pressing against your arms. Your arms are stable and keeping it from going, right? And so then I like to have two tie-offs. One is just a really quick bungee, attaches to the ladder, mostly stable, at least enough for me to then get the pole belt on. And you can see why it's important to be able to do the pole belt with one hand. Once this is tied off with the bungee, I'm in here holding the ladder as well. I feel quite safe, so I'm gonna keep going higher. And then I'll get to the second rung down where I have a rope just tied permanently to the ladder. And then I'll wrap it around once or twice, depending on how thick it is, how far away. And then I'll tie it off back to that same rung. All right, so now I've got 3 points of attachment. I feel quite good. The bungee, okay. I've got my pole belt keeping me and the ladder to the tree. And then we've got this one, which is quite nice. I've also attached this sticky foam kind of thing to keep the tree bark from getting damaged by the edge of the ladder. And so I'll keep going up. And on this one, I wasn't doing what I was sharing before, but on the way up, I was cleaning all the epicormic growth. You can see where it actually does come from inside, like underneath. It was a dormant node. There was no branch here. But once I cut the top off, it said, I need to leaf out. It sent stuff up here, all through there. And then I'll keep going. I'll keep bringing my pole belt up. And once I'm above the ladder, I'll tighten it back up. And I want to be able to feel really comfortable and secure. I want to feel stable. I want to feel safe, like I can use both hands. If you're doing 1 or 2 eucalypts, like, yeah, you can come up without a harness and you can just hold on to it and cut the things. But if you're doing it for like, an hour, 2 hour, 3 hours, get a harness, less fatigue. You can be comfortable, you can use both hands, grab your tools, go slow, controlled, get good positioning. And then I just go as high as I need to, clean things up, make the right cuts. I cut branches that were hanging downwards, right, pointing down. I cut branches that were dead, sticks that were dead from previously broken branches, I cut those off. I wanna make a nice clean trunk and direct all the energy to these 3 guardians. The closer to the base of the tree you can put the feet of the ladder, the better, especially if it's a young tree, because the further back the legs are, the more pressure you're putting on the tree versus, for example, if you're having to carry something out here versus having your spine carry it, if you put the feet of the ladder close to the tree, the ladder is taking your weight rather than the tree sideways. Much closer. Yeah. How do you tell if a tree is ready to come out of the system? It'll tell you. Notice there's lichen on this tree. That's one of the first earliest indicators. Before even the bark splitting and you can see all this dead wood, the first indicator that I'll notice is lichen starts to form. Whereas on the healthy trees, that's not happening. And so when I see that, I'm looking then up at the canopy and thinking, what's going on? And you'll notice that happens when a tree is losing function. What does that mean in a system when it's losing function? Is that its needs aren't being met. And so what happens is when a plant's needs are met, it has a high resistance to disease and insects, right? It's creating complete proteins versus free amino acids are what it creates when it's not having its needs met. There's a ton of really cool soil biology we can dive into, but long story short, when a tree or a vegetable doesn't have its needs met in the system, it's gonna be more prone and kind of begging almost the insect and the system to take it down and return it into the soil. And so when we're saying it doesn't have function, its role, because it's already completed it, it's no longer getting the full sun that it wants. It's saying, okay, well, there's other things that are gonna take my place. I'm done here. So the system is pulling it down. There was a cockroach, there was some roly-polies, there was whatever was creating all this, the lichen. The whole system is telling us, hey, it's time for this to go. And so that's our job, is strictly to accelerate that process and to notice it. All right, there's ants all in here that I'm disturbing. All right, the ants are also doing that work. And so we're just like the ants. As one of my good friends in Brazil would say, we do ant work. And so what we're gonna do, accelerate that process. And you can see that. All in here, the ecosystem is telling us. It's trying to put it back into the soil. And so we're just gonna speed that up. We could have done this earlier, that would have been great. We'll cut this stem a little bit lower, maybe around knee height, put this on the soil. We'll process this into the straight pieces, get it on the soil, start that decomposition process. And then we've just given that space to the eucalypt, the mulberry, the macadamia here is gonna start taking the space, the cherimoyas are gonna wake up more, the banana. There's also a lucuma, there's an ice cream bean. This is where it's going to feed the trees.
Eucalyptus is also starting to get lichen.
Yep.
So would you be taking that out soonish then, or only if it starts showing other signs?
I would prefer not to have to because I don't have anything immediately that's going to replace it.
Yeah.
Right? Eventually, I've got a honey locust right there that will eventually become the emergent long-term species, but it's not quite there yet. And so I'm going to keep the eucalypt around for as long as I can until that honey locust is ready to properly take that position. So these ones are the trees that I do a big like undercut and the joker cuts to make sure that it doesn't strip. And so I'll make the undercut further, like 6 inches further away, and then I'll do the top cut from there, because that's gonna release all the leverage, and then I can make a nice clean cut closer, similar to the apical cut. You should come to a training. It's really fun. Learn how to manage a food forest. This is a 4-year-old Syntropic system, and we've got a training day happening. Learning how to prune trees, stratification pruning, apical pruning, planting systems, managing everything you need to know. Super fun. What direction does a tree fall?
Where the weight is.
The direction it leans, right? Just like people. Which way do people fall? Well, the way they lean. And so I should have been paying more attention and said, okay, it's probably gonna fall that way. I'll make the V there. Silly me, I was thinking, well, it's open here, I'll send it this way. So I cut the V here. Better would have been to send it this way. And so we can always do that. I might just make a second notch right here. The thing is, there's avocado right here, and there's this Paulownia, which I want to try and preserve, whereas there was nothing of super value here. If this avocado branch gets damaged, that's okay. It's unlikely to possibly even just like take this whole side out and just let this be the main canopy. And so I'm still gonna try and send this way. So we just took down this acacia from right here. Now this loquat is gonna have more space. This Paulownia might have more space, and we're putting all this organic matter, this is a 4-year-old brush wattle, into the soil. And we'll tuck it under here, just feed it to the edge of our tree line. Bananas and eucalyptus, in the tropics and subtropics anyways, are commonly referred to as the king and queen of agroforestry. Bananas, the queen, eucalyptus, the king. Can you think about why that might be? Because you see them in almost all systems in the subtropics and the tropics, bananas and eucalyptus. Grow fast, produce biomass. Bananas produce a fairly quick crop in the tropics and subtropics, and they both produce tons of biomass, organic material of different kinds. Woody material comes from the eucalyptus, carbon, whereas bananas, green material, wet material, more nitrogen. And bananas, even if they're not used strictly for a crop, they can still be a wonderful support in the system. For example, banana roots and the root mat, which is what this is right here, the root mat or the corm, it creates moisture. So there's lots of moisture around here that without planting bananas, you would have less of that. They attract water to the system, and they also store a ton of water in the pseudo-stem. Now it's not an actual stem, right? It's not the stem of a tree. Bananas are actually a herb. There's no woody component to the banana. This is the pseudo-stem, and whether before it sets fruit and develops its rack of bananas and a little flower bell, you can harvest the banana before or after it fruits for all this organic material, all the moisture. And we've prepared for that here. We've put all the eucalyptus material down, the biggest, woodiest stuff, kind of like we spoke about before, the large logs. We've got leaves and branches, and then on top of that, we'll put the moist banana logs. That's gonna keep the moisture in on top of the eucalyptus and the acacia branches, rather than them drying out and being less useful to the soil biology. Those banana trunks can last up to 6 months, depending on how big they are, in terms of how long they'll slowly release. It's not water, it's like a hydrogel fertilizer almost. All right, lots of nutrients in these bananas. Part of good banana management is something that I'm still learning about and experimenting with. And the observations that I've made here across these different systems, the more I manage the bananas, the better quality they are. For example, if you just plant a single banana, you'll get it either from the store or you'll plant a corm. You can actually just take one of these, it's like a bulb or a potato. You can just cut the top off. You'll have the potato. You can just plant that in the ground and it'll grow into a new banana. And eventually, it'll create more suckers. That's how bananas grow. Once it fruits, this stem, unless you have a very specific variety of banana called a double mahoy, it'll only fruit once. It'll only set one rack of bananas. Once it does that, it's time to cut it down, because otherwise, if you just harvest the bananas and leave the stem, it'll just slowly rot, and it will pull the material and the nutrients back in and feed the others. But what we're doing is we're taking this material and using it to help decompose throughout the system, not only feeding back to the banana stem.
You're cutting the bulb off to replant somewhere else.
It's a great...
Because I've got friends that have got bananas, so
Yeah.
I might get some bits and pieces from them.
It's a great question. You can definitely damage the main corm depending on how you remove the bananas. With a clean cut, a good spade, and basically separating right there, you're not really going to do too much damage. Now, you are taking away from the source, the energy source of the plant. So if your aim is to create propagation material, yeah, you're going to have to separate stems off. The aim here is not to create propagation material. I don't need more bananas. And I don't like to sell bananas because if I'm always separating off, I'm always weakening my plants. And so my preference, which is what we're going to do here, is we're actually going to not separate the suckers. We're actually just going to remove the meristem. We spoke about this word before with the apical pruning, right? The meristem is the very tip where it's growing right here. There's a meristem in these bananas, and it's right here at this transition point between the corm and all the vegetative growth. And so we'll actually do an example, and we'll find a meristem. All you have to do is cut the banana here, and you'll see a little growing point, and then that's a tiny little piece you have to flick out. You remove it, and then you'll see the difference between the flesh of the meristem or the bulb or the corm and how different it is to the actual vegetative pseudostem, right? The pseudostem is a lot juicier, it's bendy, whereas when you see the ducks, for example, you guys have maybe seen the ducks, they'll do this work. They'll peck through here, they'll eat a bunch of this stuff, and then they'll bowl out into, and they'll start eating into the meristem. Now, obviously, they're not going to dig up the whole corm and eat that, but they're doing that same work. If they didn't do that, and if we didn't do that, for example, you have your corm here, the stem here, and you just cut it and don't take the meristem out, what's going to happen? It'll just keep growing. It'll just push new leaves through the cut point. You guys have probably seen that if you've cut bananas with a machete before, just cut it, you come back a day later, it's this tall. That's why you don't plant bananas along fences, right? Because they expand outwards, and so I've seen so many bananas pushing fences over. I've seen bananas growing underneath wood sheds. For example, people will plant a shed right here, but eventually it'll send stuff under here, and I've seen bananas growing inside of wood sheds. It's really damaging to infrastructure and buildings. What I've noticed is managing the bananas to reduce the stem count produces stronger, more vigorous pseudostems and better bananas. One of the lines here, I think it's the fourth line from the back, I haven't really managed the bananas in the way that I kind of thought that I should be, but again, I wanted to do an experiment. I wanted to test what happens if I don't thin the stems out. They haven't grown as much. They haven't been as productive. They've just been a lot slower, just by letting them just kind of do their thing and not thinning them out. And so thinning bananas out is useful, yes, for increasing the health of the banana itself, but also to create space for the fruit trees to come up, right? Because bananas are very extroverted. They grow fast, they grow a lot, and they take up the sunlight. They have no problem just saying, yeah, it's all mine. Whereas citrus are an example of more of an introverted species. They'll grow slow, but you kind of got to give them their space, and then they'll do their thing. Whereas if I kept these citrus in really heavy shade underneath the extroverted bananas, you put a really introverted person with a really extroverted person, the introvert's not going to get a whole lot of words in, right? And so managing the extroverted banana is very important for the health of that plant, but also for the health of the entire system to move forward. And you're then getting the opportunity to cycle that material back on and help decompose things. It's really interesting because I've seen friends manage bananas really aggressively. What I mean by that is not allowing any suckers to come up. When the suckers come up, they split them off until this main one is about ready to fruit. And then they'll let one sucker develop, and that will just be the next banana. Now, in this climate, it might take a year and a half, maybe 1 year, to go from a little sucker to creating that flower bell. It's a flower bell, it's not an actual flower because there's hundreds of flowers within that. Look behind you. So that purple dragon egg looking thing has a bunch of petioles, not petals, petioles. That banana is only producing male flowers now. The male flowers do not turn into bananas. The female flowers do. So these are all male flowers, and you can actually eat these, not raw. If you take these out, you can process this, and then you can cook it up, and it doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. You're cooking it to get rid of like the raw banana starchy flavor, and the texture is kind of like a pulled pork. So flavor it really nicely. You can also eat this, but you do the same thing. You process it, so you take all the petioles off. This is kind of like a labor-intensive process, so it's more of like sit around the kitchen with some friends and chat while you process these. But if you keep peeling these off, you get to the white inside. It's like a white color, and that is also the same thing. You can cook, you can chop it up, you can cook it, and it's like a fish replacement. The texture is kind of like fish. Yeah, so a lot of vegan folks will have banana flour.
Nutritional value or anything like that? Is it just carb?
There'd also be medicinal values. A lot of medicinal value in the stem. The actual stem of the banana, not the pseudo-stem, but the stem is actually that neck that attaches the rack of bananas into the center of the pseudo-stem. There's I think there's like Indian communities that put a lot of value on the actual stem itself and eating that. I've got banana producing friends here in New Zealand who sell the stem alone. No bananas on it, no flour, for medicinal value. And so there's lots of different ways you can use a banana, which is part of why it's also known as the joker in agroforestry. It's known as the queen and the joker, because in a deck of cards, like in a card game, the joker can be used in many different ways. In agroforestry, the banana can be used in many different ways: organic material, shelter, food, creating water. You might have noticed I haven't included bananas in the new system. We didn't plant any bananas. If you were to plant bananas in the new system, it would be at the same time as the grafted trees, because again, you dig a big hole. You dig a big hole for the bananas, you put the corm in. And
Why didn't plant bananas in the new system?
because that system is not a subtropical focus system. It's more of a temperate Mediterranean example. Hence the almonds, the citrus, the pears. It's not a focus for subtropicals. Even the long-term climax species, the American pawpaw, it's a temperate species. I find a lot of value, and I appreciate keeping systems cohesive, not mixing avocados with apples, for example. Why wouldn't you mix avocados and apples in the same system? They're both high strata trees. They both want to occupy that high strata canopy layer. Well, here's the thing. Avocados cast more shade than the apples want to sit under. And avocados will become a bigger tree than the apple. They're from different parts of the world. And so having two high strata trees, they both want the same kind of level of sunlight. The avocado is going to impede on the apple's ability to do that. Even the figs here. Figs are also a high strata tree. Planted them with avocados. And so I'm going to have to be selective about, do I want to preference the fig in this situation or the avocado in this situation? Because together, the avocado is going to dominate the figs. They're a much bigger tree. They're from the way that I like to talk about it is plants from these different communities, right? You're either from like the land of the giants or the land of the dwarves. The land of the giants, avocados. High temperatures and high humidity, high rainfall. And so trees grow big, like all these rainforest trees grow huge. Whereas in the Mediterranean, figs, land of the dwarves. So your high strata tree in land of the giants, how tall can avocados get? Massive. In the land of the dwarves, how tall are figs gonna get? I mean, they'll get big, but nowhere near an avocado. Think of one of the next layers down, a medium strata tree from the land of the giants. Could be citrus. We'll stick with like proper land of the giants. Is cacao. Cacao is like a medium strata tree that can still grow quite big, 4 or 5 meters. Even coffee, a low strata tree in the land of the giant. Coffee is a low strata tree, but it can become 4 meters. And so when you put that next to the land of the dwarves, a low strata species in the land of the dwarves, nowhere near 4 meters. The high strata tree, yeah, sure. Olives, yeah, absolutely, but it's different scales. And so that's why it complicates things to try and include your temperate stuff with your subtropicals, which is why here the temperate system is right over there and the subtropical system is here. I'm not putting apples with my avocados. You certainly can. There's nothing inherently wrong with it if you're being thoughtful about it. In a system like this where like the focus is a certain thing versus a backyard where you have little microclimates and pockets to play with, if I was putting a big system in like we are here in block 3, I wouldn't be trying to mix and make it all fiddly. I just want it to work cohesively. Hence, it's Mediterranean temperate. Citrus, almonds, pears, it'll work beautifully. American pawpaw. Even the jaboticaba. I have a bunch of jaboticaba. Low strata from the land of the giants. So I'm going to put more jaboticaba in here. And so delineating between plant communities can save a lot of headaches in the future. So bringing it back to bananas. That's why bananas are not in the new system, because it's Mediterranean temperate. Managing the bananas here, what we're going to be aiming to do is sometimes the suckers, and I'm still figuring this out, but they're not all shooting straight up. Some of the plants, even on this end, a lot of them are shooting like out quite a bit. Kind of unfortunate. I don't entirely know why, but it's not my preference. And so as we're deciding which suckers to thin, we're going to try and manage down to 3 generations. A grandmother, mother, and a daughter. A big one, a medium one, and a small one, basically. and trying to avoid having two on the same clump of the same generation, like the same age, the same size, same kind of height. And so if you see a banana that has, it looks like this, a clump where you have two of the same generation and one, you would just delete the one that's in the worst positioning. Like, how do you think about positioning of the bananas in an agroforestry system like this? If we have our tree line, and we have our trees here, and here, and here, and here, and say our banana clump is originally planted in the middle of the line, bananas will walk. If you plant, and they'll expand, right? They grow outwards. And especially with how bananas lean, they don't ever grow straight up, go on a bit of a lean. Now, what do you guys think is preferable? If bananas are gonna come up, they're gonna send suckers around the entire original plant, would you preference them leaning in the line, or would you think you'd preference leaning them into the axis, as long as they're not leaning into another tree? And how dense are these lines?
Very dense.
So they're always going to be leaning into another tree. And part of why you don't want that is because they're going to be dwarfing and kind of stunting something else next to it. So it's less important here because bananas grow slower here, right? But in systems, especially in the tropics where they grow super fast, that's really going to have a negative impact on your trees next door. And so you want to actually preference the ones that are on the outside edges, going to be leaning towards the access paths. So maybe best case is like on a 45 outwards from the line, just not going like directly across the tree line. And so there's a few different ways to actually take these down, right? And I've been trained a few different ways, and I manage a certain way with the machete to take the stem out and get the meristem. The first way is we'll just go into the field and have a look. How many stems do you guys see on this banana, or how many suckers? Get close, because we'll be getting intimate with these things. I see 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 2 on that side. So we've got 5. That's way more than I want.
So that's all one plant.
That's all one plant. And you can actually if you get close, you can see the original plant. Right here,
Yeah.
that's the original corm that would have been cut out after it fruited. And so this right here, if you pass this around, like this is the corm. This is very different to the pseudo stem material. And so when you're thinking about, all right, how do I manage this banana? What am I going to prioritize cutting out and keeping? We're looking at a few things. We're also zooming out beyond just the banana. We're looking at what's around the banana. Here we've got a cherimoya, high value tree. We've got a lucuma right underneath, right this one, high value tree. We want it to grow faster and bigger. We've got macadamia right here, high value tree, want it to grow faster and bigger. And so there's a lot of stuff around this banana that I'd like to prioritize, more than an inconvenient spreading 5-stemmed banana. We'll be pretty aggressive on this. What else are we paying attention to with regards to how we manage it? What are the things we spoke about before? Mother, granddaughter. The biggest one is its own generation. That's very clearly a different generation than these two, because they take 42 leaves to fruit. And so even if I cut it, it doesn't lose track. It'll keep sending however many leaves to get to 42, and then it'll fruit. And so if you cut it here, just straight after the cut, send its thing. If it was at, 39, it'll send leaf, leaf, flower. And so these kind of almost 3 here are pretty similar generation. We don't need that. So we've got one generation there, we'll keep that one. And we've got these 3 to choose from. And then we have a really small one here, which that might be the smallest one, or this little tiny sucker at the very base, which we might have missed. And so we might pick between these 3 to keep one and see how we feel. Thankfully, they're all leaning towards the path. Nothing's coming across the line that we have to think about. And so when it comes to choosing one, we might pick the strongest one, the one that seems the most healthy. How might we go about doing that? You can give it a shake, which one feels the most solid. There's something that I haven't yet explained, which is the difference between a water sucker and a sword sucker. The difference is basically this. Water suckers are weaker, right? They're more reliant on the parent corm. Yes, they're still a banana. Yes, they'll grow and turn into bananas, but they're just slower. They have a smaller corm of their own, and so they're more dependent on the mother. They'll take longer. The way you can visually see them apart and tell the difference is that water suckers are wobblier at the base. And so if I wobble these, that one feels wobblier than this one. All right, so already that one seems weaker. So the wiggle test, you can tell which ones feel more solid in there than the shape of the leaves when they're younger. For example, this one's a bit younger. A water sucker will have wide leaves, like more rounded leaves. A sword sucker, which is the stronger one, has very narrow sword-like leaves, more like this, very thin. That's a way you can tell visually without shaking it. The last visual indicator is that the sword suckers, the strong ones, are more kind of shaped like a triangle, right? Really fat at the base, that's why they're so solid. Water suckers are just a bit weaker. You can actually see that leaf down there. That one's a bit narrower. Water suckers will have big, wide leaves. And so long story short, we're prioritizing the stronger ones where we can, the sword suckers. And so this one was feeling a lot weaker than this one, and so we'll take this one out. And so with the machete, it's not just cutting it level like this. That's going to be quite challenging. And I have to be careful of this avocado that's growing in the clump, so I'll just move that out of the way. You take your machete, and it kind of needs to be one of these with a pointy end, and you're actually going in at an angle and then over, pull it out, new angle, in, pull the machete as a lever over, new angle, in, pull it over, and then one more. So you're kind of doing a square, in, over, and then it should actually just pop right out. If we've got the meristem, you can actually see a different kind of material. This is pseudostem, whereas that's meristem, that's corm material. Exactly, it's not the leaf wrappings, basically. If you want to double check, you can look in here, and if you haven't made it deep enough, you can actually just take this machete tip and bowl it out like that. And that's going to guarantee that will not resprout. And then with the banana stem, or the pseudostem, you take the leaves off, you put your machete there, and you send it down. Look how much water is in that. And so I would probably chop this up into two, and then I would just be putting this material on top of wood, right? On top of whatever woody material, or just feeding it back to the banana, wherever it needs mulch. And so that's done. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe kind of 5 left. Now this one's really close to this macadamia, so we'll take this one out. Now I'll show you the other way. Similar kind of thing, but just a bit easier. If you have a handsaw, you're just cutting it flat as low as you can. And see, we did not take the meristem out. That's all pseudostem material, right? You can see the leaf wrapping, but it makes it available to then take your machete and do the same thing. That's not gonna regrow. Super easy. As they get thicker, it becomes a bit more challenging. And then you throw the leaves on top. Done. And so we're gonna thin to, we've got 1, 2, 3. I'd say that's fine. 3 is okay. 3 maximum, don't leave 4. So these are examples of water suckers. Big round leaves, super loose. Garbage, get rid of it.
Done that one.
So walk down the line in pairs, have a conversation, just kind of think through all the things, like, all right, what are we looking for? What's around it? Which ones are leaning which way? Which ones feel the strongest? How many are there? All right, cool. How do we want to tackle this? What do we need to be mindful of? Juicy. When we say management, it has a few different activities involved, but what's the point of it? Why is it needed? Why is it important? The way I like to think about management at a whole, at a high level, is to accelerate ecological succession. So you're moving succession forward through management. And so there's these beautiful examples in Banks Peninsula, further south from here. There was a whole farm that just went into gorse, which is a nitrogen-fixing, really spiky plant. People hate it, farmers hate it because you can't graze and it kind of takes over grazing land. And so what happened over the course of 40 years, they let this entire farm go into gorse. As an experiment, they said, hey, we'll just actually let gorse do its thing. And what happened was all the gorse, well, it provided a beautiful nursery, like a natural ecological nursery, for a bunch of native trees to pop up. Now, were those trees in the seed bank? Were those native seeds in the seed bank? Probably not, because it had been grazed and grazed and grazed for decades. But more likely what happened was the gorse became habitat for birds. Birds would come then and drop the seeds into the understory where they had proper conditions, right? If you put seeds straight into a paddock, it's unlikely they're gonna have the conditions to germinate and grow into a healthy fruit tree or a healthy native tree. So what the support species, right, what the pioneer species, these early succession plants are doing is they're creating better conditions for our more desired trees, whether in the context is natives, edibles, whatever it is. And so the example in Banks Peninsula took 40 years for those little native seedlings to grow through the canopy of gorse, make it to the sunlight, and then begin shading the gorse out. And once the gorse gets shade, it no longer has function. It no longer is getting its needs met, and so it starts to go away, and then you're left with a forest of native trees, and then a bunch of dead gorse or skeleton gorse that goes back into the soil. And that process takes 40 years. It could take longer depending on the conditions, but unmanaged and just leaving the gorse to do its thing, not going and planting any natives, and just letting ecology do its thing can take 40 years. And so at certain scales, certain types of terrain, certain contexts, that's great. Stop touching the land, let it do its thing, let it naturally recover. In a situation where we have goals of harvesting, of ease of management, of producing, we want to be able to accelerate that. And so we choose species that are easy to manage, and we do the actual management to accelerate that process so that it doesn't take 40 years, but instead we can have wonderful fruits in improved conditions in just a few short years. And so when we're managing, we're choosing our species, not gorse, not ones that have a ton of spikes, but we're choosing our fast-growing eucalyptus or the acacia or the poplar, and we're choosing our tree lucerne, our nitrogen fixers. And these are our sun-loving pioneer species. Now, if you put eucalyptus and acacia and tree lucerne, if you put heavy shade over them, they start to decline. They think, I've done my job. I've nursed the things that were below me. They're above me now. I'm no longer needed. I go away. I go back into the soil. And so our job in management is to assess whether are these specific trees still having function? Are they still doing what we're needing them to do in the system? If yes, great. We maintain them. We prune them. We give some life back when we prune them. We improve their vigor. We improve their health. We take away any dead wood. We reduce canopy interference, right? We don't have canopies mixing together. That's part of the stratification pruning, where we're kind of defining where each strata lives. We want our medium strata, our citrus, to stay maybe from 1.5 to 3 is for our medium strata citrus. We then give maybe a meter of space between the top of the citrus, so once our citrus gets to 3 meters, for example, the lime that's in there, we're going to keep maintaining the lime at that 3 meters. Every season it'll grow up with the water suckers. We prune it back so it's at 3 meters. Our avocado, so that's our citrus. Our avocado in the high strata, we're going to give maybe a meter of space above the citrus. And so our avocado canopy can sit from 4 meters to maybe 5.5, maybe even 6, depending on how much avocado we want. Again, this is based on your goals and your preferences and your context. And then that would mean in this situation that our emergent layer is going to be from maybe 7 and up, right? And so how much stuff you're trying to stack into your system will dictate the height of your system, which is right here. You can see our eucalypt that we tidied up. We pruned this one. I don't know what height we've put that at, but maybe close to 5 meters. Now underneath it, there's a few things. There's a cherimoya right here. There's a macadamia right here. And there's a walnut and the sugarcane and the banana. So underneath of our eucalypt, right here, there's a macadamia, which will occupy that high strata. And there's a cherimoya, which will occupy the medium strata. And so that eucalypt being there, eventually it'll go and get replaced by instead of a eucalypt, it'll turn into a walnut. The high strata will be the macadamia, and the medium strata will be our cherimoya. And so in the meantime, our eucalypt is holding that space, providing organic material, and we're pruning it, knowing eventually that the walnut will be there.
With the walnut, would that actually, like, walnut, macadamia, cherimoya, that stacking, would that actually work with the walnut on top of it?
Because the jug alone?
And because it creates quite a big canopy and very dense shape. Like, would the macadamia still be happy with it?
Yeah, if we're managing our walnut, absolutely. You can create a nice, more open canopy instead of letting it be. Okay. A lot of walnuts that we see are managed as like either just a monoculture of walnuts or just wild walnuts that we see that are unmanaged. And so managing walnuts is really fun, right? They're a nice wood to prune.
Canopy open enough.
Yeah. And I might send it up because maybe my preference for walnut is less about the nuts and more about the timber, right? So I might just send the walnut up even higher than the eucalyptus pruned to get a nice saw log in 30 years from a walnut, or 60 years, depending on how long we live. And keep in mind, that wasn't planned. It wasn't orchestrated like that. These were lines that were just super experimental. They were the first lines I planted. And so it was like, hey, what seeds do I have? What can I just put in the ground without thinking a whole lot about, are these all going to match up perfectly and sync up? And so we've got options. I might say, hey, this walnut in the way too much. I don't like it. Out.
Very, like, they're all going to, like, very stems. This is, like, would be very, very close.
Very close, but there's plenty of trees that can be very healthy sharing the same root space because they occupy different root zones, different root structures, right?
So you're just going to see what happens.
Yeah, but I've also seen much more established systems with trees planted that close, and it's fine. And the reason I've left this as only having the taller 3 strata is because typically what we see, especially if you're doing things at a larger scale and you want to get production of things, we mentioned this previously, is actually shifting your low strata species out of the tree line into the alleyways. That way you're not having to keep pushing and stacking so many things in the one line, but you can have good production of whether it's, I'm trying my best to draw a japoticaba here, but they're the ones that have the fruits on the actual stem. You could have 2 or 3 lines depending on how wide your tree lines are of japoticaba in the middle, or you could do coffee. And that's going to give you a volume of your low strata species without having to complicate your tree lines. Low strata would be in the alleys between the lines. Yeah.
And then you were talking about the eucalyptus is holding space for the emergent ones while they are still
Exactly.
small.
While they're still small and developing. Another example of an emergent one could be the Paraná nut. It's from South Brazil. That would also be an emergent that probably around year 10 would transition and take that place of the eucalyptus. A lot of the work in this back area has already been done in terms of thinning out the eucalyptus, raising the tops, taking some of the heads out, pruning the tree lucerne down. We've thinned the bananas yesterday, and so there's a lot more open space. This is the opportunity to go plant in new things into the system. Even throughout the season, you know, say, oh, I've noticed a gap right here. I want to go plant this citrus that I bought from the store. You don't just want to go introduce that citrus at any time. You want to introduce any new plants at a time where you're doing management, when you're doing a prune, when you're doing an intervention. Now, there's a difference between planting a tree that's either grafted or it's a seedling that's already growing versus planting seeds. If you want to plant those peach seeds, for example, or almonds, I spoke about after the installation of a system, for 24 months, throughout the season, I'm collecting seeds and I'm continuing to plant seeds into a system for a whole 24 months. So the new system we're planting here, there will be 2 seasons where I'm planting peach seeds and loquat seeds and almonds and any other seeds that I'm finding for 24 months post-installation. Seeds can be planted at any time. You do not need to do a big intervention or management or prune to plant new seeds in the ground. They will germinate at whatever cycle, they'll be okay. It's when you're planting a seedling tree or a grafted tree into a new system or into a system, you want to do that during an intervention. So this would be the appropriate time.
What was that 24-month thing?
Yeah, so from installation,
It was a flash.
I saw that too. Powerful. For the next 24 months after an installation, I'll continue planting seeds seasonally. So when peaches are ripe, eat a peach. For the next 24 months, I'll take those peach seeds and plant them into that system. Same with almonds, loquats, whatever it is, even avocados if that's what I'm wanting in the system. Well, I'm gonna get a jacket now. We're gonna get the umbrellas out. I'll take a quick second and share about the architecture of this system, how it's laid out. This was planted 2 years ago. It's going to be going into its 3rd year soon. And you can see it's planted in between existing oranges on this line, and then those 2 lines are between existing mandarins. And in some stretches, there's 20 meters before a tree. In some sections, there's 4 meters. In some areas, the mandarins and the oranges are really close and there is nothing planted between. The way that I went about doing that was basically taking the drip line of the existing tree, moving out maybe half a meter, planting a eucalyptus. And then on the other side, drip line, half a meter, eucalyptus. So basically the entire agroforestry line here is just between these 2 eucalyptus, and everything is planted, if you can come see, in between these lines. And we had some organic material that we pruned from trees nearby to put down, but everything is planted in there. There's seeds of avocados, we planted some citrus, we planted bananas, we planted guavas, cherimoya, macadamias, mulberries, there's some papayas, there's loquats, there's all kinds of stuff in here. There's redwoods, there's Paraná nut, there's peaches, and the peaches, for example, we planted the system at this time in spring. Peaches weren't available. That season, I went down the coast, scoured around underneath some of the peach trees, brought 24 seeds back, and I popped them in. Well, these would be 1.5-year-old since putting them in the ground. And right here, you can see that peach. I just poked it in from a seed. But so a lot of this is coming up from seeds, right? The cherimoya. Here's a citrus that was planted. Tree lucerne, Paraná nut, peach from seed. Behind the Mexican sunflower, there's some loquats, cherimoya. There's another loquat. There's a eucalyptus, tree lucerne, banana, sugarcane. There's some pepino as well. So where I cut it here, these are the new apical meristems. Those will be where all the growth is directed towards. And so that would be part of the management because we do have the elephant garlic and there's shallots in this section, not just coming through with the brush cutter and smashing everything. I could do that after that post. Yeah, it's all just cover crop. There's no target crops there.
Can you say those 2 terminologies again? Yeah.
Target crop, or timber, or medicine, or whatever. Cover crop is just to have green things growing that you can cut. It's building in the soil. That's not grass. Yeah. And so how do we know it's time to manage? It's crazy out there. It's overgrown. Things are super stagnant as well, right? Are these tree lucerne in a vegetative growth stage? Nah. They're putting their energy into what? Seeds, seed pods. And so they're in their reproductive mode. And so we want to not have them do that because they're going to slow everything else down. Hormonally, they're in a very much not growth stage, they're in a reproductive stage. And so we want to hammer them back so they go back into a growth stage so that everything else wakes up for spring on that same page, hormonally. So we'll be doing the same thing. We'll be limbing the eucalypts up within reason, right? If it's, don't limb them up all the way so there's no branches. Leave at least a meter's worth of branches. With the tree lucerne, that's the next one that we're going to be mostly managing here. This one is a not a great one. It's splitting it's sent 2 stems up right from the base. This one's leaning that way, this one's leaning in. Really, and they're wet right now, so they're quite heavy. We want to take as much of the weight off as possible so they correct. I don't like using stakes to try and pull and force it back because it wants to grow straight up, but right now it's just really overloaded. And so first I'm going to just start by taking a lot of the really heavy stuff off. That's already better. You saw how it snapped back? And then I'll take some of this old, yucky, not super, this isn't vegetative. This is reproductive. So I'll take this and I'll just cut. Now that's vegetative. That's nice. And so I'll leave that there. There's some vegetative stuff in here. I'll take that because that's not vegetative, but that is. And so I'll leave that. All this sticky material, I'll take all that off. If it's hanging downwards, I'll take that off. This one doesn't have any, notice this doesn't have any vegetative material on it. So I'll probably just take that and do a thinning cut. This would be a heading cut, right? So for example, on fruit trees and support trees, if you're cutting and not leaving any branches or any points, that's a heading cut. Ideally, you're not making a lot of those, right? Because that takes a lot of energy for it to regrow here. It's not so nice. And so I'm just gonna do a thinning cut, which is taking it back to the nearest branch point. Perfect. Same with this one. It's a heading cut, doesn't really have any nice branches. There's that, but there's nothing on it. Take that out. This one, same kind of thing. Nothing on it, we'll take that back there. One thing we're also paying attention to, what's below it? What's next to it? Right? We're not just focusing and looking at this, but we're looking at, cool, there's a citrus tree here, there's a peach tree here, the pot of nuts down there. We want to give space to those. We want to give them breathing room. This being right here, it's not ideal. I'd like it to be over in the line. Unfortunately, this tree has decided to bend like that. We want to give it space, and these are going to grow up from here. I've done a bad example, and I've just been pruning and not focusing on where I'm putting material and how I'm organizing things. Ideally, as you're pruning, you're paying attention to where you're throwing your stuff so you can just double handle it less, right? Materials handling is 90% of this work. Is pruning this, putting it over here, pruning that, putting it over there, processing it up, putting it here. So the way that I like to manage the tree lucerne, same way that we manage the eucalyptus, especially when you have these nice straight branches, which is the way that you prune like this, generates nice straight branches. What we don't want to do is be facing out this way and just start making a mess of things. Because then we have a mess over there that we have to put over here. The best way to do this is you lay the branch where you're going to want to be organizing the material. Now, keep this in mind. On the north side, this is north, on the north side of these lines, we've got elephant garlic accidentally left over. Try your best to see it and not crush it. I'm gonna put this material on top of all this old material. You can poke around and see there's lots of old material there. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of lay this in there. I'm holding the butt and I'm macheting away from myself. I'm not cutting this way, right? I'm macheting down the line. I'm stripping it, and then I'll turn it over, expose more branches, and I'll just strip it this way. Being careful not to cut the trees in here, and I'll just strip it so that all the material is falling where I don't have to double handle it. I don't want to double handle. I want to just have it like that, and look, that's perfect. Now I'm left with this stick. It's a little bit long, so maybe I'll cut this, put the tip in the ground, cut it like that, easy enough to then come here and tuck that under there. Now, another thing to pay attention to, always cut in the direction that a branch grows, right? I don't want to be trying to cut, the branch is growing this way, the tree is growing that way. So for this next one, I'll lay it right here, and then maybe I'll just hold this straight up, and I'll still machete down and away from me, and then spin it, expose more branches, and they fall exactly where I want them. All right, I might come and organize. I don't want floating branches. I don't want to have them tangled up in the tree. So as you're going, you're just being tidy, you're organizing. If you have sticks on the side, put them underneath. John mentioned this earlier. You don't need to crush your trees and have them here. just on the edge. It's okay to leave like 10 centimeters. This whole strip right here is dedicated for organic material. Don't feel like you need to throw it up against the trees. Along is just fine. Step 1 is the work that you guys don't have to do. Selective weeding. There was more grass in the tree lines. Step 1 is always to pull that out because otherwise you're feeding your grass. If we had kikuyu running through here and we did a big prune, we fed a bunch of material, a bunch of sunlight, a bunch of growth hormone, a bunch of organic matter, fertility, the kikuyu will say, oh look, new sunlight, new food source, great, let me just take that. And so selective weeding is always the first step before you earn the right to manage. Thankfully, Kaylee and Sophia did a huge job and weeded these tree lines for us. That's step 1. Step 2 now is dealing with the emergent and the high strata canopy layers. Before we start being delicate pruning down here, we don't want to prune this peach really nicely and then accidentally drop a eucalypt on it, because then we just damage the thing that we pruned really nicely. And so step 1, prune your emergent and your high strata support trees first to kind of rebalance them, right? This was way over here, it's straightened up, we've taken that weight off, we've put the organic material in place. And so just making a tidy effort, putting things along the line. Questions? With the eucalyptus, it's a little bit similar to the tree lucerne. I'll jump over and actually just give a quick demo over there. Eucalyptus is a little bit less of like the shearing the branches like that. With the eucalypt, because we're cutting them straight off the trunk and dropping them, it's more this kind of material, right? A little bit less to strip. And so it might just be easier to lay it down like this, again, parallel, in line, and then you would still want to compress it because we've got these floating branches. Now we don't want floating branches because they're gonna oxidize, right? The sun is just gonna zap the moisture and it'll be a lot less ecologically useful for the soil. So we want everything to be as nice and in contact with the soil as possible. Lay them down. The way to do it is not then parallel chopping, but again, it's going in the direction that it grows. And so if I wanted to compress this, I would be standing here and I would chop almost exactly parallel with it, not perpendicular. And that's just going to compress it a little bit more.
I miss how much we're taking off the tree lucerne.
More or less that much, like most of it, like 95%. But you're leaving very specific vegetative growth. You're not leaving old, stagnant growth with seeds and seed pods and flowers.
Okay.
And you're thinking about where it is in relation to what trees and just giving other things space and giving them vertical space, right? Stratification pruning. So we spent the afternoon in block 2 in this system, which is going into its 3rd year. And so most of what we were doing was limbing up the eucalyptus, so pruning them taller, and pruning the tree lucerne. We have not yet started doing maintenance pruning and stratification pruning for the fruit trees, the understory, right? Opening things up, and you can see we've got a ton of organic material on the edge now, and it's just the middle line that's been managed. We have not yet managed this line or the line over there. In between these two lines, the axis is a bit wider, right? Right there, it's maybe like a 3-meter axis. Here, it's closer to a 5-meter or 4.5-meter axis. And so we have elephant garlic and shallots, Egyptian walking onion, planted in between a cover crop. And so we'll be managing that as well. But man, the transformation night and day between a managed system you can come see, taking about 95% of the foliage off, leaving the vegetative growth and taking all the seeds off, all the seeds and the flowers. And we're exposing the loquats, the peaches that were planted from seed, parana nut, the Araucaria augustifolia, the citrus. Exposing things, we've got the poplar, we've got the mulberry right here with the loquat. And so that's the idea, is we're doing the first round of pruning our support species, opening things up, dumping all that organic material down here, the biggest stuff underneath, sticks, we've got logs from previous seasons, placing all that down. now would be the perfect opportunity to plant new things into the system. And so we've got about 100 jaboricaba, which were planted about 6 to 8 months ago in the nursery. They were about this big, and we're going to fill all these lines up with a bunch of jaboricaba. A lot of these tree lucerne were bending over, right? They were really top heavy and falling out this way. And so part of this work is taking the weight off, and so they're more upright again, and they'll redevelop that canopy over here. It's a beautiful system. I'm really happy with it. It's a great opportunity to see a little bit more of the details of what's happening in the system. When it's really overgrown, it's hard to tell what's going on. So when I say that I take 98% of the foliage off the tree lucerne, this is what I'm talking about. Stripping it almost bare, leaving some fresh growth to shoot from, and just opening everything up underneath. You know, we'll still do our maintenance pruning, our stratification pruning, our formative pruning on some of the fruit trees, but this already is a huge, huge difference. Lots of material down, feeding the soil, covering the soil. It's looking good. It was a great afternoon session. Really quick, we'll go take a look at block 1, the oldest system, and see how things have ended up after all the pruning. And so this is block 1. This is the oldest system that we've just given a big reset to. We could do a little bit more pruning here and there, but most of it's been done, and we've really cleared things up. We've raised a lot of the eucalyptus. We took some entirely down and out, and really just thinned things out. You can see here's an example. Logs on the edges of the tree lines. Everything's gonna get just dumped with sunlight, growth hormone, organic material. We might also plant some more jaboricaba in this alley line right here. We've got our cherimoya, which are looking absolutely beautiful. Again, big dose of organic material, cutting trees down and out, thinning things to make space in the canopy, limbing things up. This is what a bit of a reset can look like. It's a lot more open, right? Before it was like a jungle in here. You couldn't really see what's going on. Now it's looking good. So it's cool to see the progress between the year 2 system and the year 4 system. The year 2 system is easier to manage, especially with a group of people, because the species selection is lower diversity of support species. It's more consistent tree lucerne and eucalyptus versus here. It's eucalyptus, it's paulownia, it's acacia, it's all these different things. Having a lower diversity of trees allows for easier management and delegating of management, teaching people how, so you're not having to manage, 7 different species, but you can manage 2 quite easily. It's cool to see what to expect the future systems to look like and develop into based on the year 4 system, and then what the installation is happening now. People can start to project and see, this is what we'll have to be doing for management. This is what we can expect out of that system, which, by the way, is looking sweet. So this is the right stage to be doing this, because we've already done our emergent and high strata pruning. Because otherwise, and it's not such a big deal when the trees are small, but big heavy branches come down, they break things. So that's why we wait to do this after we have done all the pruning and organizing of material from above in the canopy. So formative pruning is something that I see a lot of homeowners not do. And it results in trees that for the first few years look good, they're growing well, but they don't establish a good foundation. And so you end up with problems. And I can see a number of problems in these old trees, thinking that there wasn't maybe the right kind of formative pruning that I would prefer. Because what results in neglecting to do formative pruning is branches that are, like we saw before, not creating the strongest foundation for the tree. It might result in large branches crossing over the middle, rubbing, and just a not very well balanced tree. And it's hard to maintain, and eventually you'll need to make these cuts anyways. And so better off making them when the tree is small, and it's gonna hurt you and the tree the least. So with citrus in particular, one thing that I'm paying attention to is you don't want all of the main branches coming from the same point on the tree, right? Because what happens is, you've seen some of the citrus here, they can have a tendency to get really overloaded, branches bend, and sometimes they break. And so what happens is, if one of those branches breaks and all the branches come from the same point, that branch breaks, and suddenly you're exposing all those branches to that breakage point. What I would prefer is I'm having a branch come out, it comes up, another branch out this direction, comes up, another branch off of that direction. And so it's less of a open vase like this and more like a staggered up and out, up and out, up and out. And nothing's really wanting to cross into the middle. And so we're gonna use that same framework that we spoke about on one of the first days of pruning fruit trees. Is first you're taking out the crown, right? The main top growing leader that's usually straight up. You're pruning things that are pointing inwards towards the center of the tree. You're pruning things that are going straight up and straight down, branches that are crossing and rubbing, branches that are dead, and the 6th one is branches that are parallel, like growing one is directly on top of or below, right? You're choosing which one. That's the super simple, like can't mess it up framework for approaching fruit trees. The little nuance of difference is, with citrus in particular, I like to have them coming up and out, rather than branching all from the center, which some trees, they're less prone to breakage, so you can get away with that. When you look at this citrus here, planted 2 years ago with everything else, and it looks like I didn't actually do any formative pruning. And you can tell because it's really crowded down here. Now, it wouldn't do me any good to focus up here and on the edges first. We'll get there, but why would I bother with that when it's possible that I would take things out from the base? And so I'm always starting out my pruning. Yeah, I'll look at the whole tree, what's happening around, right? We've got some things here and over there. But really, the place that I'm starting to look at this tree is as close to the base as I can to just make an assessment of, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stems coming off of this first main junction right here. I don't want that. Already I'm seeing these 3 really weak ones. Automatically, they're gonna go. I don't want those to be, because look at this. That's not gonna be very structurally stable as it grows. You put some weight on it, that's gonna fall, and it's just so low, it's gonna not be like, you raise the skirt on all these trees eventually anyways, and so that's gonna go, and these other 2 small ones are also gonna go. Now this is a really great sales pitch for these clippers as well. You can just stick them in, they make a really clean cut up against the collar of the tree. We took off the 3 little tiny main kind of water shoots, water suckers, but then there's this one that's still bothering me. Can you guys tell which one it is? Yeah, the super bendy one. I don't like that at all. And imagine, like, yeah, it looks nice. There's foliage here. It's occupying the space. Cool. But I'm eventually going to want this to not be here. I don't want this to be a main foundation of the tree. And so I'm going to get rid of it. First, I'll cut it here to just give myself a little bit of better access from behind here. And again, I want to cut this as close to the collar where it's kind of fused in as possible to give the tree the best chance of healing, right? If you leave like a nub, it's going to have to kill that. That's just going to die. It's going to be an entry wound for disease, pest, pressure, etc. And the tree's going to have to slowly enclose that. So I'm going to give that tree the shortest recovery time as possible. And I can even make another cut right there, getting it even shorter. All right, that looks a lot better. Now, this branch has opportunity to become a formative part that goes that way. But the next thing I'm looking at really is back up to the crown. This is one of the starting points as well. And so things that are shooting straight up, directly in the middle, I want to bring sunlight in from the top to everywhere else in the tree. And so I'm actually going to take these 2 that are shooting straight up, and I'll take these back right there. Take the crown out, right? Super spiky. This is probably a lemon, I don't remember. And so then you're looking around, all right, what other kind of warning, like red flags are we looking at? Branches pointing inwards, dead ones. These little tiny branches, I'll just get rid of those because they're not going to be productive. They're going to go anyways. I prune citrus pretty aggressive. Like I take a lot of the material off in the early years, usually, just to make sure I'm getting a good growth habit. This branch is also pointing inwards, growing in towards the center of the tree. That can go, as are these ones here. So I'll take those. These 2 are stacked right on top of one another, and so I'll just take the lower one out, and this is already looking a lot better. Now this side is quite crowded, right? And they're all kind of going like this, but this is a beautiful example of what I mean. We're looking, and maybe sometimes it's helpful to look down on the tree or up from between to really get a sense of, is anything crossing into the middle? Which quadrants of the tree, which sections are being covered by what branches? That's looking a lot better. You guys notice that this branch is stacked pretty much directly underneath this one. And so I might take this top branch out and let this one, because remember I said I don't want all the formative branches to come from the same point, right? Yes, we've got these 3 coming from here, but then this one comes up. I'll send this one to come occupy this quadrant. This one comes up, this can occupy that side, this branch will occupy that side, so we'll actually take this one out here. We'll take the little water sucker off there as well.
And Byron, you do this heavy pruning in springtime?
Yeah, I don't want to wait till summer to do this because that's when borer is most active for citrus, and so I don't want to prune in summer for citrus because that's when the borer is a lot more active. And yeah, spring is when I'm doing this, mostly because it's the same time that I'm resetting everything else. I generally won't come in to the system to only prune a specific tree. Right? I'm trying to do everything systemically. One of the last pieces that I'll do is tip pruning, and I don't do this every time. I'm undecided on how often I'm actually doing the tip pruning, but basically that would involve pruning these growing tips off, right? Well, it's one of those things that I've been told to do, and I see it done. I'm not convinced at this stage that I need to do it every single time I prune the citrus. So I'm undecided on like how much is it a rule that I need to follow, how useful is it. It's something that I have been told to do, and I've seen the results of it, and it's nice. But on a tree that's this age, I'm not sure. But already this has a much better foundation than when you rewind to 3-4 minutes ago, when it was kind of a mess in here. It was really congested, there wasn't a lot of airflow, and there wasn't a clear direction for the tree to channel its energy in a way that's going to be creating a really nice foundation. This is going to come out this way, this is going to go up, and eventually, and the reason you would do the terminal pruning, right, at the ends, especially on things that are going straight up, is to encourage it to branch. That's how you can turn vegetative wood into fruiting wood. If this was going straight up, which it is, I would take the tip out and it'll start to branch there, right? It'll send multiple branches. And so that's how you can turn vegetative wood. If there is a sucker that's shooting straight up and it's in a good spot, prune it and it'll go sideways and turn into fruiting wood instead of vegetative wood. But the idea is to open the crown, right? Get some sunlight dispersed throughout the canopy. Remove the ones that are rubbing, pointing inwards, crossing, stacked on top of each other. And that's really like, I know I'm repeating myself, but that's gonna be the framework that really resolves a lot of like the questions about, oh, where do I prune? Where do I start? How do I prune this tree? That's gonna solve like 90% of your pruning questions.
So this would be citrus, and what other trees would follow that format?
Pretty much all the same fruit trees, right? There's subtle nuances between them. But for example, I'm doing the exact same pruning format with the avocados. It's just that those are happening up in the higher canopy, right? So for the avocados, I'm not trying to do that at this height. I'm gonna send the avocados up and up and up until they're at the point where I want them to begin branching, and then I'll make that first cut. For example, there's avocado seedlings in here that are 4 meters tall. Soon I'll cut them, get them to fork at the right canopy height, and then that's when I begin that style of pruning. And so in an ideal world, we'd have a ton of grass to be putting in as biomass, but because it frosted the first year, it killed off 99% of them, and so we're left with just this one. That's why we're moving more towards like temperate species like the willow, the elderberry in the new system, not relying on, ooh, is it gonna frost too hard? If you don't get any frost, this is a great option. I'd love that if this was along all the lines, but here it's just a challenge before the microclimate is developed enough. So this would also come down, and all of that is gonna feed that line as well. So the bonnet grass is on the edge, sugarcane is in the middle. The way I'm managing the sugarcane is I'll actually use the back of the machete blade and I'll kind of like peel the old leaves down and just kind of like clearing a lot of the crap out of there. If there's really like weak ones, for example, this one is like coming off of an existing cane, I'll just cut that, but really like starting to clear a lot of the old leaves by just putting it in between the cane and the leaf and sending it down, right? Just getting all this old stuff, decongesting things, and then with the tops that are green, I'll actually kind of do an upwards machete swing just to make some space, open things up, and use that organic material. So you should be able to see as much of the cane as possible. Even this, I'll just strip that back way, there, just all the old sheaths to expose the canes, and that grassy material can just go in on that line with the mulch, along with all this bonnet grass. The heading cut to get new foliage and properly be working, it was too low. Whereas if you do a heading cut above where it is still sunny, that's okay. But to speed up how fast it can recover, we are leaving vegetative growth just to encourage a fast and speedy recovery. And see, like I never would have, this obviously wasn't me, but I would never have left a heading cut like this. This isn't vegetation that's in a useful place at all. So I would have just come through and cleaned that right back. Because there's no sense in trying to have it grow vegetation that wants to be in full sun, or at least high up in the canopy. It just doesn't make sense. All right, just send it up where it wants to go. You could even take this lower branch, give some space for the citrus here. Oh, just all the way back. You might find really helpful is applying pressure in the right direction. That's why these double-bladed ones are really nice, because whether you're pulling this way or that way, there's a blade going into the cut that it's opening, right? So if you peel it down, so even if a branch is weighted, like it's heavy over on that side, you want the blade on top so that as the weight of the branch pries the cut open, your blade is driving deeper into the cut versus pinching. For example, if I had a flat edge on this top one and I put the blade that was cutting on the bottom, as the branch is falling, the opening is actually, the cut is closing on the blade. Not gonna make it very easy to cut. So I always basically just want the cutting blade on top versus being here, it'll pinch on the blade and make it harder to cut through. You'll feel the difference there. And so sometimes just pulling the branch down on the direction of the cut makes it really easy. Ready to rock and roll? Cool. So this is an area that clearly the formative pruning did not happen, right? We can see this branch here, there's old wood, and look at this, guys. Come see this. This is why we cut close to the collar. And this is quite an old branch that should have been cut a lot earlier, right? It shouldn't have been allowed to get this big, but even the cut that was made, it's It's ugly, it's disgusting, right? That's an invitation for disease to go into the tree, and the tree is gonna have to heal around that. And I'd be much more likely to cut this as close as I can to get this off so the tree can properly heal. By now it's got borer, it is what it is. But even these new cuts, right? Like cuts being made here, no, let's cut this at the collar, give it the best chance to regrow. And gnarly cuts like this, I mean, that's disgusting.
For that hole to happen on the, yeah, there.
It would have been the exact same thing. A branch cut too far out, it died, and the tree tried to kind of heal, but it just took a long time, and now there's just a hole. And so I didn't have to walk very far into here to see an example of like not ideal formative pruning. And so Nevada, when you're asking the question of like, what do you do in this case? It depends on how much of a necessity production in the next few years is. If there was a cut made right here, you can see that there would have been a branch and a cut was made and it reshoots, and it wasn't managed, right? So we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stems coming from this. 2 of these are overlapping this way. They're stacked on top of one another. This one's like, pretty useless. And one of the indicators as well that you're looking for is to see if a tree is like stagnant. It's called the photosynthesis to mass ratio. Photosynthesis to mass. So you're looking how much photosynthesis is the tree doing relative to how much mass is there on the tree or on the plant. And so you look at a lot of the citrus that are in the new systems, for example. A lot of photosynthesis, a lot of leaves, a lot of deep green leaves. It's beautiful for how much mass there is, right? Versus you look at all this stuff, man, there's like a lot of mass, like a lot of dead wood just hanging, not being, and the branches are really long and big, and then there's a little bit of foliage on the end of the branch. A lot of mass relative to how much photosynthesis there is. And so once that ratio gets like more mass heavy, to me that says, okay, cool, time to prune. And so it's a good way of looking at trees and saying, cool, what's the photosynthesis to mass ratio? A lot of material for like very little foliage and photosynthesis on the outside edge, well, probably should prune. Like on the Fijos, it was super obvious. There was like a ton of like dead space in the middle of like no leaves, just long branches, a ton of them, and then like a layer of leaves around the edge. And so a lot of mass relative to how much photosynthesis. This one that's crossing over, but this one's a little bit better, right? There's still some funny cuts that were made a little bit far away from the collar. Here's a great example, right? I'll cut this one. A lot of mass to like, 12 leaves. The branch is really long. It's like reaching just to put a little bit of photosynthesis out. A lot of dead wood. So that's what you're avoiding by regular pruning, regular interventions, managing your trees. I mean, you guys should have been here though, because when we first arrived, the leaves were black, the oranges were black because there was so much congestion. There were dead limbs that had been previously, the owner would just like prune limbs and leave them in the tree. He wouldn't even bring them down, nothing, just prune it and leave it. And so things were really congested, black sooty mold on everything. We would have to like scrub the oranges before we sold them. And so we did a heavy prune at the time to open things up, got rid of a lot of the sooty mold, but you can see it's not gone, right? It's coming back. Things are congesting up again, right? And that's all inhibiting photosynthesis. Insects, they suck on things and poop it out.
And it's not a hazard for your system because your system is healthy?
Yep. I've not seen any of it in the system at all. If you just prune your system, if you just maintain it, airflow comes in, sunlight. Yeah, exactly. Get outside, eat well, exercise. See, what is this? I don't like spending time in here, you guys. So I'm looking for reasons to get out. Let's go. I don't like being in here. In a lot of my videos, I talk about global planting. So what I mean by that is if I had a 5-hectare block, for example, that was empty and bare, I would globally plant support species. I wouldn't worry about planting expensive fruit trees. I would just plant support species and leave it alone, and then focus a laboratory, a high density, high diversity place where I'm paying a lot of attention, and a small section to give it as much as I could and learn a lot. But the whole area, even if it's over the next 5 years that I get to it, it's developing in these pioneer species. The microclimate's improving, trees are doing the exudates in the soil, they're improving the conditions, shade, grass, all that. It could be in rows or it could be in a grid, or it could be whatever pattern, but rows are quite easy, especially if you have the equipment for it. And this is what that might look like, or a version of that, where there's no edible species in here, other than the citrus that got really heavily pruned back because they were super diseased. They were worse. They were way worse than the ones we just saw. So they were cut back really heavily, not worried about getting a crop in the next coming years. And the lines were then planted with a bunch of different weedy pioneer trees, right? We have tree lucerne, we have acacia, there's castor oil, there's some eucalypts. And I don't have intentions of managing this system for another probably 12 months. Planted it about a year ago, along with a heavy prune of all the olives along this boundary. which were overgrown, they were shady, and these white sapote. They were old, super stagnant, so they got cut. And all of that material, it's maybe hard to see and understand, but all that material, which was a ton of material, was organized into these 3 lines and piled up. How tall was that pile of material? Those are huge piles of material. Where'd it go? We took the big chainsaw, we cross-cut all the material to take it from a pile like this down to here. And so you'd be amazed at how much material we actually did fit in here. You can actually take a look. You can come dive in and see how much material there's actually just like stacked in that's building soil. Massive amounts of logs and really just big stuff and branches. And so I'm gonna give the next another year and just let this system go wild. Let it go crazy. I'm just gonna let this area accumulate, right? The leaf litter, the shading of the grass, building fertility, and then later I'll come in really heavy-handed. I'll do a big prune. I'll plant a bunch of edible seeds. Maybe some grafted trees, maybe not, depends on how I'm feeling. But this is like a global planting, right? Just weedy pioneer species, not worrying about it, low effort, low maintenance.
So you've simply planted that for the purpose of it supporting new systems?
No, for the purpose of supporting this system in the future.
So you have plant material, microclimate,
It's already feeding the soil.
And then you'd put your fruit trees in later?
In here, yeah. And if I wanted to, and if I had abundance of fruit tree seeds, which maybe at some point I will, I'll go push avocados in, or I'll go push some peaches in, or I'll go push whatever seeds in I want. But it's not an area that I'm actively working and trying to manage. I'm just letting natural ecology do its thing. Look at the photosynthesis to mass ratio, much better. The citrus is putting on, I mean, it's still not amazing, but that's so much better than what they were. The leaves were super tiny, they were super yellow, and already it's coming back with a much happier growth than what they were. Yeah, I'll cut all the dead wood off there. This will become the new tree. More of just a training area to test different eucalypt varieties. And so last year we came through in autumn and did the apical prunes on some of these. Some of them responded better to it than others. You can see that one's doing quite well, but a lot of epicormic growth, right? We spoke about that in the first few days. Epicormic growth coming straight out of the trunk. Dormant nodes, not so great. Whereas this one, a lot better. Just testing different things. These are all persimmons, which I love, but they're kind of falling apart. So this whole line, I'll retrofit. I'll do a heavy prune on these at some stage, get the form corrected, plant some other trees in here. It's kind of like the last line in block 1 that has not yet had some kind of intervention. It's a section that I planted with a bunch of fruit trees, a bunch of support trees 3 years ago, and I have not yet gone in to manage anything. I haven't touched it. I planted it and I walked away. It wasn't intentional, but now that I've done that, I'm just using it as an observation, a case study to see, hey, what can I get away with? What can I plant and then walk away from, and how is it going to respond and react to zero management? And so that's what we're going to go see right here. So this right here is a fully neglected, abandoned food forest, right? It's a small section, but you can see the exact same pattern. There's the tree lucerne, it's pretty weighty, a lot of photosynthesis, a lot of seeds, and there's citrus underneath. There's bananas that haven't been managed. There's a bunch of other stuff that hasn't been managed. There's guavas right here, cherimoya, it's coming up. There's a Japanese raisin tree right there. And so the things are working. Now, is it as advanced and moved forward in succession as any of the other areas? Absolutely not. It's taking its sweet time. But with that in mind, look at this. A little lime on a citrus that, man, look at how healthy that is. Right? Deep green leaves, no funny molds, black dust, nothing. Struggling for light, yeah, but at the same time, it's pretty good lemon or lime. This is just an example of, hey, can I just plant something and walk away for 3 years and not touch it?
wow.
Yep, the kikuyu is climbing up into the trees. But with that being said, when I get in there and prune, maybe I'll just have a quick dig around and see. Well, there's another lime. And look at this, like there's some grass in here, but the soil, it smells incredible.
Just stuffed.
Zero management. And so what else is in here? A white sapote with like the deepest green leaves you've ever seen. There's taro, there's the cherry guava, right? And so it's all in here. And yeah, it doesn't have like the best growth habit and the most vigorous growth because it's been struggling for light. But it produced 2 limes this year. It's got a bunch of flowers. And so if I come in here and give it a prune, do some weeding, right? There's not actually a ton of weeding to do, right? Look at this. It's just a mat of like dying grass, right? There's actually not that much like immediate grass pressure around this tree. And so for zero management, I'd say that's pretty good. And so yes, I say, oh, I'd like to manage the system once, twice, 3 times a year, but at the same time, you could get away with not really doing that much and still having phenomenal results. Imagine planting a citrus and then walking away for 3 years and coming back. Do you have a happy citrus like that? Probably not. So we'll keep walking down the line, see what we see. cherimoya, guava, Japanese raisin, another citrus. And you can see right here, there's a big gap where the tree lucerne haven't been. More grass pressure, right? They've all decided to bend away from this section. But then another guava with fruit. Now that's good. Ginger, white sapote, and look how much organic material there is. Like so much biomass that when I do come through and do a intervention, the soil is gonna be covered for a long time. It's gonna be great. And so just to show you what you can get away with, you don't have to be as anal about, oh, I have to manage it 3 times a year. Life happens, right? I like to go away as well. It's certainly possible, full-time job, part-time on land, like you can really give it as much attention as you want. What field grafting is, like Brendan described, is you're taking a known cultivar, Hass avocado, you're taking the mature wood, right? You can see it's mature because it's flowering, it's in that stage of life. You take that, which is called scion wood, and you would paste this. So for example, you would take the bud wood or scion wood, and then you would take a seedling, a seeded avocado that's either wild, it just grew here because there's that mother tree right there, or a seed-grown tree that you have in your lines, and you can tip it at the point where the diameters are the same. And what you would do is you would graft these together. And what's the purpose of that? Why would you go about doing this whole process? You get these exact fruits, so the genetics are identical. And so you get the exact same ripening time. They're not gonna ripen at different times of the year. You're gonna get the exact same fruit qualities, bumpy skin, it's easy to transport, same flavor profile, and you're speeding up how fast it's gonna be producing. Now this is already flowering, it's mature wood, and so this whole tree altogether thinks that it's pushing growth through here, it thinks that it's a mature tree. This is what happens when regular grafting occurs at the nurseries. You buy a citrus tree, it's on maybe 2, maybe 3-year-old rootstock, and it's got scion wood of a particular variety. They didn't just grow that citrus from a seed and pot it up and put it in a bag. They grew a rootstock because this is going to control the vigor of the whole tree. And so in the citrus world, they're growing a certain trifoliata, for example, from seed. They cut it, they graft it while it's still in the pot, they let that grow for 1 or 2 more years, and then you buy a nice grafted citrus tree. So this is how we can choose exactly what variety of avocado or cherimoya or citrus. We can choose exact varieties while doing it on the cheap, right? Not at a huge cost, because once you develop this skill, you can have unlimited opportunities to graft your trees without spending $30, more recently $50, $60, $120 per tree, right? At a nursery, $120 for a persimmon tree. You can grow persimmons from seed, and if you have a friend who has a persimmon tree, you go collect budwood, you do some grafting, there's a free tree instead of having to spend $120 times however many times you're doing it. And so there's no downside to planting from seed, because you can either just let the natural genetics express themselves like we did for that avocado over there, where it's 10 years old, covered in fruit. It's unique, right? The fruit over there, it's got a really unique flavor, super tasty, very creamy, and it's not one of these known cultivars. What I also recommend is to go buy some grafted trees, depending on how big your project is, what your goals are. I've got a ton of avocado seedlings in here, right? I'm looking at some. There's a few grafted avocado trees that I've purchased. Why would I do that instead of just doing everything from seed? It's faster to buy a grafted tree, it'll start producing quicker, but I also now have that parent material. So I can take those grafted trees that I bought 2-3 years ago, and granted, there's not an abundance of material like there is on this one, so I'll need to be selective about, I'm not gonna strip the whole thing back just for budwood, but I can take 1 or 2 branches and then paste that onto all my seedlings that I've planted. And so say for every 1 grafted tree that I buy, I'll plant 20 from seed to give myself the opportunity as the seasons go, harvest budwood from the known cultivar. And so here, in terms of avocado varieties that I've purchased, we've got Reed. There's things like the Esther, right? It's more of a dwarf one. Cleopatra, more of a dwarf one. Mexicola, turns black on the outside, super nice. There's the Hashimoto. So there's these avocados that you can't really find in the nurseries, which for me, super interesting. Some of them are doing better than others, but those ones are nice to have the material from, because I don't know any other growers who have them, and so it's nice to get unique varieties that then I can begin grafting onto all my countless avocado seedlings. And one thing I like to do, as I'm eating fruit, sometimes, yes, I'll go and take the peach pip, for example, and eat a peach and I'll push it into the tree line. When I have an abundance of avocados, sometimes I'll just take the pit and I'll just throw it somewhere back here. If they land in a good spot, I'll have the opportunity to graft them down the road. And so that explains a little bit about the why behind field grafting. And the field grafting that we did last year was my first time doing it here. I'd done some experiments a few years prior, but they didn't end up being very successful. And so last year was the first time I saw a lot of really great success. Now, I saw great success with the cherimoya. I tried field grafting a lot of the white sapote. I think only 1 or 2 of those worked. And so I had higher success rate with the cherimoya. Didn't try any of the avocados because last year I had really good access to really nice scion wood for known cultivars of the cherimoya. Somebody brought some. This year, I don't have access, so we'll be grafting from the trees we have here, the avocados. And we'll go through that process of finding some seedlings, saying, cool, what is the same diameter, roughly pencil thickness there? And if you guys come see, look at this. There's the outside layer, right, the skin of the tree. And then as you shave it, you guys see that light green layer right in between where it then turns into more of the wood? So that light green layer is the cambium. That's where a lot of the nutrient and water transfer happens. The cambium is what you want to line up, why it's important, and it's not required, but it makes it way easier to match the same size of the scion wood that you're cutting from the known cultivar and the rootstock. And so for example, if I'm cutting and grafting this up here, most grafts don't happen at this height. Most of the time people are grafting at ground level. We did some grafts at this level as a test. They worked beautifully. With the cherimoya, I think we had like an 80 to 90% success rate, which is phenomenal for my first year doing it. And for everybody else who was doing it, it was their first time as well. Now, keep in mind, we had the guidance of somebody who's been doing this professionally for years. I'm gonna do my best to impart that onto you guys this year. But again, I don't do this all the time as my full-time thing, but I can remember from what he shared and what we did, it worked. In terms of what materials you need, one of them is called buddy tape. It's like grafting tape. Now these all have different qualities and characteristics. Most garden centers won't have this. It's more like horticulture orchard. Not necessarily a grafting knife, but it's pretty close. And basically I don't use this for anything except grafting. I want to keep it really, really sharp and clean. So one of the things you're looking for is you want it to be able to stretch a lot. Like when you pull, yeah, see this one it's okay, but it did snap. His was going like 8 times the length before ripping. So I don't think this is the one that we were using. Yeah, see that one's actually not, no, see that one's not stretching very much. And I think this was the one that was doing the better job. This is much better. Okay, but you don't want your cuttings to dry out. One of the mistakes that I made when I was first trying without knowing anything about grafting is I would just take the scion wood, make a cut, do the thing, line it up, tie it together, and walk away. But that obviously, it would dry out. No moisture retention. And so where you will see people do waxes or paint a little thing is they'll put it on the end, right? And you can see on a lot of the citrus, for example, or even when you're doing cuttings and not grafting, of figs, right? A lot of figs in the nurseries are propagated this way. They take a cutting and they just put it in the pot and they leave it for a year or 2 years. But even still, they'll put a blue wax on here to keep it from just losing moisture. The way that Simon taught us last year to do this wasn't to use wax, but essentially what you're doing, you don't need a massive long stick, even something like that will work. Roughly straight, roughly the same size. This is nice, perfect. And the first step we did was we leave the bottom piece clear because we're gonna actually end up cutting that to use it. But then you're basically just wrapping this entire thing in tape. And you're gonna wrap this entire thing all the way up to the top so that it doesn't lose any moisture. And the idea is why it's called buddy tape or budding tape. It'll allow the buds to shoot through this. Pull that there. Now that's not gonna lose any moisture. It's gonna keep it inside, keep it nice and humid. The next thing you would do, the way that Simon was showing us how to do this, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to like mess it up and make it all janky and gross. You kind of want to do one clean motion, straight as possible, and you're trying to create in the middle like a very just clean, easy wedge. The way he was showing us to do that was actually to pull the knife towards us, because it's a smoother motion than trying to push. Kind of pushing your hand away and pulling towards you, right? And then you'll inspect that. It's a little bumpy, and you're going to keep going, and ideally, in one slice, you're getting the top side, and then you're flipping it over and getting the bottom side. This might be considered cheating in the grafting world, I don't know. But hey, that looks a lot better to me now. That's pretty not great, but we're gonna move on just so I can complete this demo and then we can start practicing. What I'll do, I'll just start to place that and wiggle it down very gently and not going further than necessary. And then what I'm gonna do is I want to line up the cambium, ideally on both sides. Pry it open and I'll give it a little test and see. If you look on the sides, can you see our cambium wants to be as lined up as possible? The inside of the bark wants to line up. And so I wonder if I can push that in a little bit more. Because you want to get this really tight. You don't want this to be loose. Just like we wrapped the first one, but as tight as we can, right? And so I was finding this super helpful with 2 people, but you're making sure this is still nicely lined up. And then you're just squeezing, and then you hold it, and then you replace a finger, wrap it, pull it tight, replace the finger, keeping it as tight as you possibly can the entire time. And you just want to make sure there's a really nice strong connection. And you don't need to go all the way up, especially if we're getting this done nicely. And then now that we're here, I'll start twisting this up a little bit. and then that's where I'm going to tie it off, but only after I wrap this around this point. That should end up being really tight. There shouldn't be any play. You were keeping it tight the whole time, making sure that you were lined up with the cambium. This is all properly done. Then the last thing you would do is you would put a little label. Unfortunately, we wrote it in pencil, and so now we just have like empty blue tabs, and I have no idea what the varieties are. But then you would label which variety, all right, so you know. So that's a super easy demo. Obviously, it's going to be your first time doing this, I'm assuming, for everybody. And so firstly, just find some budwood and just practice making, because that's one of the hardest parts. Maybe partner up so we can both be like learning and watching it. And then once you have a selection of those made, all right, start wrapping them up like this, do a nice job, and then we can find some seedlings to begin practicing on. What's the ideal height for field grafting? I love this question because grafting location actually dictates a lot about where the tree is going to begin spreading, because mature wood has that tendency, right? This avocado was grafted at the base, and that's why it's began spreading at that point. Whereas if that avocado had been grafted here, it would begin spreading here. And so in Costa Rica, for example, in Brazil, where their systems are cacao and avocado, a medium strata and a high strata, they're field grafting everything. So there'll be cacao seedlings coming up, there'll be avocado seedlings coming up, and the way they'll organize things is they can dictate exactly where the canopy begins to spread for the different tree. And so if you know, I want my cacao to branch here, so the canopy is here, and we want the avocado to begin branching here, so it's up there, you graft it at the appropriate height. In an ideal world, they actually might be grafted a little bit higher up like this, to allow them to have a more spreading canopy up and allowing room for things below them. I didn't test any field grafts at this height with the cherimoya. The highest we did was at knee height, and it worked. We also tested some at ground height, it worked. Depending on what size the avocado is that we can find, we'll base it on that. But it really depends on what height you want it to begin spreading at. So in Germany, what they were doing, they might just take a small section of the budwood right there, and they could literally just take this, and essentially all they were doing was just taking a bud off of the proper wood and then grafting that and then cutting here. So they weren't doing whatever this kind is, a tongue and groove. They were just doing the bud grafting like that. I don't know the technique on it, so I'm not gonna be able to effectively show you guys, but this is the one that I know and have had success with, so that's why I'm sharing that with you. But yeah, there's plenty of ways to graft. I've seen macadamia orchards where they would have trees this old that were grafted previously, but they want to put new varieties on, and so they would just cut it here, and then they would take 4 of these and just paste them on the side of the cut, because as long as the cambium is matching up, it doesn't actually need to be the exact same size. That now makes it easier in these situations, but if you can match the cambium up, there's no reason why you couldn't cut this and put 4 on. There we go. That's as much as I can share in that concise time. And this would be reasonable budwood to take. It's got some avocados on it. I believe this is the ester. It's going to start sending these 2 as the main leaders. So I probably wouldn't want to interfere with that by taking the apical branches. And so we'll just take this. That could make some nice budwood if I don't mess up too much during the cutting. Not giving ourselves a ton of options to mess up, but we'll see what we can do. This is a seedling one that was grown when this line was planted. From seed, nice growth habit, and to be honest, I don't mind taking it at this height and trying to graft it here. The beautiful thing is if you mess it up, this dies, and then this just keeps resprouting, and so you're not gonna kill the avocado, right? Even the cherimoya, for example, we can find some that didn't work last year. I grafted them, and it died, it didn't take, and so it just sent up suckers from below. That's fine, gives me more chances later, so I'm not really putting this at risk by what I'm doing here. And so then I'll see what we can do. Because we have limited material, I'm gonna try and not be too fussy. That one's okay, it's a bit sharp. That looks pretty good. The benefit of planting a bunch from seed, like we've done in the new system, like I've been doing here, is it gives you lots of options, lots of opportunity to try. Whereas if you only plant 5 seeds, you only get 5 opportunities. Whereas if you plant 500 or 50, you get way more opportunities to mess up, which, you know, you will. I keep messing up, but if you plant the way that nature plants, which is indiscriminately and abundantly, you give yourselves more opportunities to learn. And see, that actually lines up quite nicely. Looking at that cambium and this one, they're in line. And so I'll take these leaves off. Might need to go a little bit lower, but we can always just check that. No, that looks pretty good. It's not gonna line up, as long as it's perfectly matched up on one side, that's all it actually needs. But to match it on both sides just gives yourself the most opportunity. So then I'll tie this And the more you do this, the better you get at it. It's a skill worth practicing, even if you're not seeing a high success rate to start, right? But once you unlock the skill, it's like black magic for plants. I'm going to double check again, make sure I need to keep those cambium layers aligned, and I'll start really giving it a good squeeze now. Hey, congrats for making it to the end of the management training video. Well done. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch the installation training video. It's right here. Full breakdown on the whole installation process, start to finish. Hope you enjoy. Keep growing.